Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Nicholas Wilcox. Nicholas Wilcox, a 39-year-old man from Putnam, Connecticut, lives in a duplex apartment, a popular property type in Florida that is designed for two families, with separate rooms, yards, and entrances. Isabella, a 38-year-old woman from Brazil, was the first person invited to rent one of the vacant apartments by Nicholas Wilcox. She used to work as a flight attendant for a national airline in Brazil. After getting divorced in 2010, she moved to America with her children and later married an American, which helped her obtain a green card. Isabella's marriage ended in 2016, and she started dating Eric Robinson, a 46-year-old man from Massachusetts who had never been married and had no children. Despite their romantic feelings for each other, their relationship was occasionally turbulent due to their passionate nature and Eric's bachelor lifestyle. According to Isabella, Eric's behavior was inconsistent and unpredictable, switching between cheerfulness and aggression without warning. This led to repeated breakups and makeups. By June 2017, they had separated once again, shortly before Eric and Isabella moved in with Nicholas. Initially, the living arrangement worked well, with Nicholas and Isabella and Eric respecting each other's space while also spending quality time together. However, over time, problems arose. It was discovered that Eric was using and storing illicit substances, which explained his erratic mood swings. This behavior led to Eric's arrest on August 23, 2017. Nicholas was fortunate to have a steady stream of work, unlike Isabella, who struggled to find a suitable job. To make ends meet, she started helping her neighbor in the construction business. It's worth noting that Nicholas's family had a long history of working in similar trades. His grandfather was a fisherman and boat builder, while his father dedicated his life to construction. After graduating in 1996, Nicholas joined the family business, becoming a roofer. He worked alongside his older brother, Donald, as contractors, building their own client base. At 23, Nicholas started a family with his high school classmate, Kathy. They had a daughter a year later, and twins 3 years after that. Throughout this time, Nicholas worked hard to provide for his family. Despite his busy schedule, friends and acquaintances remembered him as a devoted husband and father. However, his dedication to his professional pursuits may have contributed to the eventual breakdown of his family. They divorced shortly after the birth of their younger children. Despite this, Nicholas continued to support and communicate with his family. In 2017, Nicholas made a fresh start by moving to Florida to pursue better job opportunities. The new location proved to be a smart choice, as he saw a significant increase in clients. Unlike his previous seasonal work, Nicholas was now able to earn a steady income almost year-round. As a professional, Nicholas's skills were in high demand in Florida, where powerful hurricanes frequently damaged homes along the coast during storm season. His expertise was needed to reinforce and repair homes, which helped him build a successful business. Despite leaving his family back in Connecticut, Nicholas remained committed to caring for his children from a distance, sending them financial support and visiting whenever possible, as per his agreement with his ex-wife. After living in a multi-apartment complex in Fort Lauderdale, Nicholas moved to the suburbs to lower his housing costs. This is when he met Isabella. As the hurricane season began, Nicholas's workload increased significantly due to daily orders. At the same time, Hurricane Irma was approaching the area where Nicholas lived and worked. An emergency was declared, and about 7 million people were evacuated from coastal areas. To prepare for the storm, Nicholas spent his time reinforcing homes, boarding up windows and doors, and later clearing the debris left behind. Nicholas's main job was to help people, and he got paid for it. But he wasn't in it just for the money. His older brother said that Nicholas always lent a hand to those in need. In September 2017, Florida was bracing for a devastating hurricane. Nicholas spent the day boarding up windows with plywood to prepare. As a result, there was a shortage of plywood in stores, leading to long lines of people waiting to buy some. At that time, Nicholas met a woman named Pamela, who was struggling to find materials to protect her home. Nicholas promised to help her, and that evening, he delivered the 7 sheets of plywood she needed. He then spent the whole day boarding up her doors and windows, refusing payment for his efforts. Nicholas was deeply sympathetic to Pamela's plight as a single mother in need of assistance. In response, he offered her help, and she was extremely grateful. This sparked a romantic connection between them. The devastating hurricane that followed brought Nicholas a substantial amount of work, which allowed him to employ his neighbor, Isabella, as his assistant. Isabella's responsibilities included cleaning up job sites and handing Nicholas tools as needed. As they spent more time together, their friendly interactions blossomed into romance. On September 3rd, they made a commitment to each other, sealing their promise with a handwritten vow in blood, symbolizing their desire for a long, happy life together, filled with many children. The lovers, Nicholas and Isabella, faced minor issues and disagreements soon after their union. These disputes escalated, culminating in a serious conflict on September 22nd, which led Isabella to leave home and spend the night in a hotel. However, they reconciled the next morning. According to Isabella, Nicholas was neglecting her and showing a lack of respect. Nicholas, on the other hand, believed she was exaggerating. Their disagreements ultimately led to severe consequences. On October 5, 2017, a mysterious call was made to the local police. The caller claimed to be Isabella's former husband and asked the police to contact Isabella, stating she had information about a recent crime. However, he didn't provide further details. The police responded promptly and called Isabella, who sounded hysterical. When questioned about the situation, she claimed everything was fine, except for a fight with her boyfriend, Nicholas. Isabella told the police that her partner had left her and driven away, but when they mentioned a call from her former husband, she broke down and confessed that her partner was actually dead. She claimed to know where the body was and offered to show them. When the police arrived at the address Isabella provided, they found a house that was being prepared for a hurricane, with all windows and doors boarded up. Inside, they noticed a strong smell of cleaning products and paint, indicating that one of the bedrooms had been thoroughly cleaned. However, upon closer inspection, the detective suspected that someone was trying to cover something up. The walls and floor had been hastily and sloppily painted, and they found containers of hydrogen peroxide, which is often used to clean bloodstains. They discovered small bloodstains on the bedding and bedside table, and it was clear that the old mattress had been replaced. The police found blood stains throughout the room, suggesting a violent crime had taken place. Isabella had attempted to clean up the scene but hadn't finished before the police arrived. Isabella was discovered inside the duplex, visibly distressed, and explained that she had been under the influence of a sedative during the phone call with her ex-husband, which accounted for her unusual behavior. Despite her initial confusion, Isabella confirmed that she knew what had happened in the room and where the body was located. Due to her unstable state, the police decided to take her to the station for further questioning. Meanwhile, the police had spoken with her ex-husband again, who provided a partial account of the events. According to Isabella's ex-husband, she had called him and told him about the crime. However, during her interrogation, Isabella claimed that her former boyfriend, Eric Robinson, was involved in the crime. She stated that on October 5th, around 2 a.m., Eric had arrived at the duplex, found her and Nicholas asleep, and became enraged by a vow hanging above the bed's headboard in the bedroom. Eric woke Isabella by holding a knife to her throat, threatening to harm her if she screamed. As he did, she saw Nicholas, who was lying next to her, struggling to breathe. But Eric didn't allow her to look any further and forced her out of the bedroom. Then, he brutally beat Nicholas, who was defenseless, using a brass knuckle and the bat. After the beating, Eric wrapped Nicholas' body in a tarp and tied it up with straps. He threatened Isabella, forcing her to help him get rid of the body. Later, the detectives were confused as to why Isabella, instead of calling the police, had called her ex-husband. In an explanation, Isabella said she was terrified and sought comfort and guidance. According to her, Eric also made her clean up the crime scene and erase all evidence. Before leaving, he returned her phone, which he had taken earlier. Her confession raised doubts and required further investigation. Additionally, the detectives noticed visible bruises and scratches on Isabella's body, which she claimed were a result of Eric beating her after Nicholas' death. The investigation started with a search for the victim and the suspect, who revealed the location of Nicholas. While medical examiners worked on the body, forensic specialists arrived at the scene. Meanwhile, law enforcement searched for Eric, who had been released from prison on October 3rd and was living at a different address. During this time, Eric had met a woman, Merida, and was staying with her. Merida told the police that on the night of October 5th, her boyfriend received a phone call and left immediately. He returned around 5 a.m., packed his things, and left again without explanation. When asked if she noticed any bloodstains on her boyfriend's clothes, Merida said she hadn't seen anything suspicious. Eric was found around 8 p.m., 4 miles away from the house. He refused to cooperate with the investigation and was taken into custody for further inquiry. During the interrogation, Eric provided a different account of the events than Isabella's. According to Eric, Isabella had contacted him on the night of October 5th, despite having a restraining order against him. Isabella attacked Nicholas while under the influence of banned substances and ultimately ended his life. After regaining her composure, she realized she needed help and asked Eric to assist her. In exchange, she promised to rekindle their relationship and start anew. Eric, still having strong feelings for her, agreed to her terms. The investigation revealed that Isabella was not as innocent as she seemed. She had a history of police encounters, and on September 22nd, a heated argument with Nicholas got out of hand. Under the influence of Xanax and other substances, Isabella became violent, destroying some of Nicholas' belongings and damaging his work vehicle. Fearing for his life, Nicholas contacted the police. Although they reconciled the next morning and Nicholas dropped the complaint, investigators discovered Isabella's history of erratic behavior, including a conversation with her ex-husband that shed more light on her past. He described Isabella as having a volatile personality and a hot temper. During their argument, he had threatened to report her to immigration services if she continued to behave in such a manner. For Isabella, the opportunity to live in the U.S. was crucial, so the threat of deportation was devastating. It's possible that during another argument, Isabella's explosive personality led her to react violently, motivated by her desire to stay in America. To gather more information, detectives started interviewing people close to them. A neighbor who lived in the adjacent duplex proved to be a crucial witness. She reported seeing Eric arrive at the scene in his car on the night of the crime. He then retrieved some tools and trash bags before leaving the area. The investigation continued, with substantial evidence collected. On October 11th, Isabella was called in for another interrogation, which she attended voluntarily since she had not been arrested at that point. Detectives reviewed video surveillance footage and determined that on the night of the incident, Isabella personally moved Nicholas's body and disposed of it in a trash container. During this time, she remained calm and composed, making decisions independently. She also met with Eric Robinson that night. Isabella appeared relaxed and friendly. She even purchased items needed for emergency repairs herself. However, as the investigation progressed, she began to change her story, adding new details about the events. Isabella claimed that Eric had threatened to kill her and deport her and her children, forcing her to act as she did. Although her statement seemed believable, investigators were cautious in their conclusions. Both Eric and Isabella had questionable pasts, which raised suspicions. Eric, in particular, had a history of run-ins with the law, dating back to 2001, primarily for possession and distribution of narcotics. In August 2016, Isabella had legitimate reasons to fear Eric in question, as he had committed an aggravated assault against a woman. In June 2017, he was arrested for strangulation and later that year for possessing prohibited substances. Eric's neighbors were terrified of him due to his aggressive and unpredictable behavior, and they actively avoided him. On October 14, experts discovered traces of Isabella DNA on the Nicholas body, contradicting her claim of not having touched Nicholas. This evidence suggested that she was involved in the violent crime against her lover, at the very least in disposing of the body and eliminating evidence. Despite the evidence, neither Isabella or Eric admitted to any wrongdoing. While Eric was held in custody, Isabella was briefly detained before being released to await trial. Although everyone expected the court proceedings to begin soon, various complications and delays pushed the trial back by 5 years. The trial of Eric Robinson was significantly delayed due to the bureaucratic issues. During this time, the prosecution developed its strategy and tactics, while the defense thoroughly reviewed the investigation findings. Additionally, new evidence was discovered, including the recovery of Eric's deleted social media account, which he had used to discuss the crime with his former friend. As the trial approached, Isabella made a plea deal with the prosecution. She agreed to testify against Eric Robinson. On April 10, 2023, the trial finally took place. The prosecution argued that Eric was solely responsible for the crime against Nicholas, while Isabella's role was presented as a witness who tampered with evidence and helped eliminate traces, a crime in itself. The trial was marked by several cancellations due to legal complexities, but resumed after a week. Throughout the trial, Eric was charged with premeditated murder. Despite inconsistencies in Isabella's testimonies, her attorney maintained her innocence. The prosecution emphasized witness statements describing Eric's unusual behavior on the night of the crime. Specifically, Eric used his new girlfriend's car, which didn't have GPS tracking, to avoid detection. He also left his mobile phone at home to prevent tracking. Separately, other case details came to light. After the crime, Eric and Isabella were together in a room nearby, where they were intimate. Isabella later explained her actions, stating she was under the influence of strong sedatives at the time and also feared for her life after what had happened. The motive behind the brutal and senseless murder of Nicholas was revealed to be jealousy. Although Isabella had ended their relationship, Eric still considered her his girlfriend. When he was released from prison, he returned home to find that significant changes had taken place in his absence, which only fueled his rage and hatred. During this time, Eric plotted his revenge against his perceived rival. He committed a cold-blooded attack while Nicholas was asleep and vulnerable, sealing his fate with the first strike. Eric then attempted to cover his tracks by scattering evidence in various locations. The murder weapon was later found in a landfill, and Nicholas's body was discovered wrapped in tarpaulin and hidden in a trash container. Isabella, following Eric's instructions, painted over the blood-splattered walls and cleaned the area to conceal the evidence. Ultimately, 51-year-old Eric was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for second-degree murder. Isabella was found guilty of aiding Eric, but the court considered threats and coercion as mitigating circumstances. As a result, she received a suspended sentence and is on probation until 2026. Isabella was willing to do whatever it took to gain U.S. citizenship. Just 10 days after Eric was incarcerated, the parties signed another agreement in which Eric promised to marry Isabella. However, he failed to follow through on this promise. It seems that Isabella is willing to marry anyone as long as it helps her maintain her status. All the men she has been involved with have been used for her own selfish purposes, and she has manipulated them into considering marriage. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Matthew Patrick Matt Podolak. Matthew Patrick, also known as Matt Pat, was born on June 10, 1975, in Ohio, USA, to Patricia Romano and Leonard Pat. During his high school years, Matthew was an active member of the hockey team. After graduating, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy. Following his time in the Navy, he landed a job at Phoenix Industrial Finishing, a company owned by his uncle. However, Matthew struggled to get along with his co-workers. According to his sister, Chrissy Duca, some colleagues were jealous of his uncle's influence and resented the fact that Matthew was being groomed to take over the business. As an outdoorsy person, Matthew enjoyed activities like boating, camping, and hunting in his free time. He also participated in softball and hockey games. In 2003, Matthew met his partner, Holly McFeature, and they started dating soon after. They moved in together in a Cleveland home and began building a life. Friends described Matthew as a happy and settled person who was eager to start a family. Within a year, they welcomed their daughter, Samantha, and 2 years later, their son, Josh. Additionally, Holly's child from a previous relationship also became part of their family. Matthew fell deeply in love with Holly, and his mother, Patricia, said he loved her with all his heart. In a short time, Matthew went from being a bachelor to a father of 3. The early years of their relationship were filled with love, passion, and mutual understanding. However, by 2005, their relationship had become argumentative and strained. Whenever Matthew and Holly had a fight, he would leave home and spend the night at a friend's house. This happened multiple times, and his friends advised him to end the relationship, suspecting that Holly was selfish and had a bad influence on him. Despite their warnings, Matthew never listened and always went back to Holly. Matthew had a life insurance policy that listed Holly as the beneficiary, but his friends cautioned him to remove her from the list. Again, Matthew ignored their advice. Russell Henry, Matthew's best friend, recalled a tumultuous period in Matthew's life. During this time, Matthew's mood would swing wildly, veering from extreme happiness to anger, crying, and fear. Russell understood that Matthew was struggling with depression. Despite being initially thrilled about the prospect of raising his 3 children, Matthew's outlook was overshadowed by the volatile situation at home. Russell urged Matthew to take precautions and remove guns from the house. Later, in 2006, after the hockey season ended, Matthew began gambling online and lost a significant amount of money. His family and friends grew concerned about his well-being and noticed his depression. At their suggestion, Matthew sought medical attention and was prescribed antidepressants. However, by the spring of 2006, Matthew's health began to decline rapidly, prompting Russell to express grave concern about his physical well-being by Memorial Day weekend. Russell had asked Matthew to help him move a motor from one boat to another. However, Matthew, who was once very strong, had since gained weight and was struggling with the task. He was sweating heavily, complaining of back pain, and claimed to have lost his strength. Concerned, Russell advised Matthew to see a doctor and recommended Dr. Thomas Mandat. Matthew scheduled an appointment with Dr. Mandat for July 26, 2006. On the day of the appointment, Matthew phoned Russell to ask for directions to Dr. Mandat's office. During their conversation, Russell overheard Holly yelling at Matthew in the background, telling him he was too stupid to remember where the doctor's office was. The doctor's appointment revealed that Matthew's primary complaint was back pain. After examining him, Dr. Mandat diagnosed Matthew with kidney stones and prescribed medication to help him pass the stones and manage the associated pain. A few days later, on July 30th, Matthew called his father to share that he had bought a fishing rod for his daughter and invited him and Russell to go fishing together soon. Matthew's father said his son was looking forward to a meeting, but later that evening, Matthew attended a party with Russell Henry, who testified that Matthew was in bad physical shape. He had gained weight, was sweating heavily, and had trouble walking due to extreme back pain. After the party, Holly contacted Matthew's father, telling him she had called 911 because something was wrong with his son. The father briefly spoke to Matthew over the phone and found him confused and upset. An ambulance took Matthew to Parma General Hospital, where doctors suspected organ failure. Tests revealed that Matthew's kidneys had failed, and he had metabolic acidosis, a condition in which the blood becomes too acidic. Dr. Mandat, part of the emergency medical team, suspected that Matthew might have ingested a toxic substance like methanol or antifreeze. Holly denied that Matthew had swallowed anything harmful. Tragically, Matthew died the next day, July 31, 2006, due to kidney failure. Dr. Mandat explained that metabolic acidosis is usually caused by respiratory problems, but not in this case. He added that ethylene glycol, a toxic substance found in antifreeze, can also cause metabolic acidosis. Matthew's family and friends were devastated by his death, but Holly showed no emotional response. In fact, her friend Rebecca Vega was surprised by Holly's lack of emotions when they made funeral arrangements together. At the wake, Matthew's father had to ask Holly to enter the room where the casket was, and she seemed unbothered. Russell Henry described her as acting like nothing had happened, almost as if she was at a party. What's more, Holly's actions soon after Matthew's death raised suspicions. The day after his death, she used his bank card to withdraw money from an ATM and wrote checks in his name, emptying his bank account. Her mom reported this activity to the police, leading to Holly's arrest and charges of forgery. Holly agreed to repay the money and was placed on probation for a year. Her family claimed she was trying to get money to care for their children, but it's worth noting that Holly was also a beneficiary of Matthew's life insurance policy, although it was a small amount of $10,000. 2 weeks after Matthew's death, Rebecca Vega visited Holly and was concerned to see cleaning solvents lying around the kitchen, given the young age of the children in the home. Holly was questioned about Matthew's death. She mentioned that one of the items found was antifreeze, which Matthew used to winterize his boat. However, Russell Henry, Matthew's best friend, testified that Matthew hadn't had a working boat since 2004 or 2005 when the engine failed. Michael Jama, a Cleveland police officer, had been friends with Holly since 2002. He would often visit her home, where she would babysit his children, and they would chat over coffee. To avoid interrupting her or any other man, he would call ahead. One day, when he called, Holly told him he didn't need to worry about calling ahead anymore because Matthew had passed away the previous week. Holly discussed Matthew's death in a surprisingly casual tone, mentioning that he had kidney problems and pain from playing hockey. Her casual demeanor came across as insensitive and heartless, Michael recalled. After Matthew's death, Holly removed all of his belongings from the house. She gave his computer to a friend to delete certain content, and then cut up his clothes to make a quilt, leaving his father and brother with no mementos of him. 6 weeks after Matthew's death, Holly began a romantic relationship with Charles Lipham, a police officer from Cleveland. Initially, she told Charles that her ex-boyfriend Matthew had died from kidney failure. However, she later changed her story. When the autopsy results were released in January 2007, they revealed that Matthew's body contained a large amount of ethylene glycol, a key ingredient in antifreeze. After learning this, Holly speculated to Charles that Matthew might have intentionally taken the substance to end his own life. The autopsy report revealed that Matthew died from chronic ethylene glycol intoxication, but the coroner was unable to determine whether his death was intentional or accidental. Holly gave conflicting accounts of Matthew's death to different people, claiming she didn't know what antifreeze was and telling one friend that Matthew died in an industrial accident. She also suggested that a colleague might have poisoned him out of envy. However, Matthew's family suspected that the killer might be someone close to home, citing Holly's apparent lack of emotion at the funeral despite claiming to have cried in the car beforehand. During their investigation, detectives found 2 bottles of antifreeze in the garage of Holly's home, which was documented in the police report. Holly later started dating Jameson Kennedy, a man with a criminal history and substance abuse issues, but she kept the details of Matthew's death secret from him. One night in September 2008, Holly became emotional while drinking with Jameson and began talking about Matthew, revealing previously undisclosed information. Holly broke down in tears and expressed her desire to escape her problems and leave Cleveland. She revealed her regret over a past event. When Jameson asked what was bothering her, Holly made a shocking confession. She had spiked Matthew's drinks, which eventually led to his death over time. However, Jameson wasn't convinced of her sincerity. He sought the counsel of his lawyer friend, Santiago Feliciano, and shared Holly's admission with him. Santiago advised Jameson to report the information to the authorities if he believed it to be true. Jameson then contacted Holly to discuss her confession, unaware to her that their conversation was being recorded. He hoped she would reiterate her claim about causing Matthew's death, but instead, Holly vehemently denied ever harming him. Holly denied putting anything in Matthew's drink, saying she never mentioned such a thing to Jameson. However, their relationship began to deteriorate as Jameson suspected she had cheated on him. On November 8, 2008, Jameson went to Holly's house to confront her. Feeling scared, Holly called the police. When they arrived, Jameson attacked them and was arrested for assault. He was later found guilty and sentenced to 10 years in prison. After his arrest, Jameson told the police that Holly had confessed to him about her involvement in Matthew's death. This new information led the police to reopen the case, which had stalled since the 2007 autopsy report. The investigation was reinvigorated as more evidence pointed to Holly's involvement in Matthew's death. Dr. Galita conducted the autopsy on Matthew Pat's body. 6 months after the autopsy, Dr. Galita issued a report detailing his findings, which was co-signed by then County Coroner Dr. Elizabeth Balge. The report concluded that Matthew died from chronic ethylene glycol intoxication, but the manner of death remained unknown. Dr. Galita explained that the ingested ethylene glycol entered Matthew's bloodstream and then his liver, where it was rapidly broken down by alcohol dehydrogenase. This process transformed the ethylene glycol into oxalate, which then combined with calcium to form calcium oxalate crystals. Notably, Matthew's kidneys contained an extremely large amount of these crystals. Dr. Galita's testimony revealed that Matthew's flank pain, which started on May 20, 2006, was caused by kidney crystals. During the examination, Dr. Galita found not only kidney damage, but also signs of the kidneys trying to heal. Further examination showed that Matthew had crystals in his heart and brain. Dr. Galita also diagnosed severe acute myocarditis, a heart muscle inflammation that takes at least 3 weeks to develop. Dr. Galita concluded that Matthew's death was a result of prolonged ethylene glycol intoxication, which led to a series of acute events and sublethal poisonings over a period of at least 3 months. Matthew's friends confirmed that his go-to drink was raspberry iced tea, which he would bring to work in a thermos or the original container, often a half or whole gallon jug. One friend, Michael, recalled that Holly McPhee would occasionally bring lunch to Matthew, which always included a half or whole gallon container of iced tea. During their investigation, police seized 2 bottles of antifreeze, one Peak brand, one Saturn brand, from Holly's garage in August 2007, after she had moved out. 3 years after the initial autopsy results, the report was revised in 2010. The updated report, signed by Dr. Frank Miller, the county coroner, concluded that Matthew Pat's death was caused by chronic ethylene glycol poisoning and was a homicide. Although the cause of death remained the same, the revised report changed the manner of death from undetermined to homicide. 6 years after Matthew's death, authorities finally decided to take action, charging Holly McPhee in July 2012 with aggravated deprivation of Matthew Pat's life. In 2013, Holly pleaded not guilty and faced trial. The prosecution's case relied on circumstantial evidence and featured 15 witnesses, including Matthew's family and friends, his doctor, and police officers who investigated the case. During the trial, witnesses testified about Holly's suspicious behavior, a phone call Matthew made before visiting his doctor, and the fact that Matthew hadn't owned a working boat since 2004, eliminating any need for antifreeze. Meanwhile, Holly's lawyers argued that Matthew's family and friends had prejudged her guilt and pressured law enforcement to pursue charges against her. Holly's legal team claimed that she was not responsible for Matthew's death. They suggested that Matthew was struggling with depression due to his online gambling losses, work issues, and difficulties communicating with his young child, which led him to intentionally ingest a lethal dose of antifreeze. The defense claimed Matthew died from a single dose of antifreeze, not multiple doses over time. They presented Dr. Robert Bucks, who testified that Matthew's death was due to acute poisoning, indicating a single ingestion of ethylene glycol consistent with suicide. Dr. Bucks disagreed with Dr. Galita's myocarditis diagnosis, instead believing Matthew had a heart attack. He added that myocarditis can occur independently of ethylene glycol poisoning, and flank pain isn't a typical symptom. Dr. Bucks claimed kidney stones aren't related to ethylene glycol poisoning, but the state presented contradictory evidence. Matthew struggled with depression, but was committed to being a good father. Jamison Kennedy testified that Holly confessed to mixing something into Matthew's drinks, but Holly denied it. Kennedy's credibility was questionable, but Sergeant Quinn confirmed Kennedy's statement was made when Matthew's cause of death was unknown. The jury delivered a guilty verdict on August 28, 2013, sentencing Holly to life in prison with parole possible after 30 years. The case relied on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Drew Shoden. Drew Katrina Shoden was born on September 26, 1981, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, to Alan and Linda Shoden. She had an older brother, Sven. When Drew was 3, her parents divorced, but they remained on good terms. Her mother later married Sid Walker, a travel agent, and they raised Drew and her brother in a comfortable home on Whitefish Lake, a scenic vacation spot in Minnesota. Throughout high school, Drew excelled academically, earning honors and developed a passion for golf and art. Her true love was art, and her room was filled with her sketches of rock stars, models, and friends. After graduating from high school, Drew attended the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks. Those who knew her described her as a lively and caring person who loved to help others. She enjoyed traveling and exploring the country, with a dream of visiting Australia. In fact, she had plans to travel there in the spring of 2004. Before the event, Drew had 2 part-time jobs to save money. She worked as a sales associate at Victoria's Secret and as a waitress at a nightclub in Grand Forks. On Saturday, November 22, 2003, Drew finished her 4 p.m. shift at Victoria's Secret in Columbia Mall. She then went shopping and bought a purse from a store. After shopping, Drew walked to her car in the parking lot and called her boyfriend, Chris Lang. During the call, Drew suddenly said, "Okay, okay," and their connection was lost. Chris didn't think much of it since their conversation wasn't important, so he didn't call her back. About 3 hours later, Chris's phone rang again. When he answered, he only heard the sound of wind and phone buttons beeping. In a later television interview, Chris recalled his thoughts when the call with Drew was interrupted. At the time, he didn't sense any urgency and didn't imagine that something terrible was happening. He thought it was just a typical cell phone disconnection. It wasn't until later that he realized the call had been cut off for a much more sinister reason. Drew didn't show up for work at a nightclub, causing her colleagues to worry. Around the same time, her friend and roommate Meg Murphy got a call from the nightclub asking about Drew's whereabouts. Meg didn't know where Drew was and started searching for her by contacting their mutual friends and the local hospital, but she didn't find any leads. By 9 p.m., with no progress, Meg contacted the police, telling them that Drew worked at Columbia Mall. The police sent an officer to the mall, but it was already closed by the time they arrived. While searching the parking lot, the officer found Drew's car. When they inspected the vehicle, they discovered it was unlocked and showed no signs of a struggle or any evidence of a crime. However, they did find a black knife sheath on the ground near the car. The car's interior showed no evidence of theft, with personal belongings including papers, a wallet, and a newly purchased purse still on the seat, indicating that robbery was unlikely to be a motive for any trouble Drew might have encountered. With Drew's friends, boyfriend, and parents unaware of her whereabouts, investigators suspected a possible kidnapping. The investigation initially focused on Chris Lang as the prime suspect, but he was quickly ruled out after it was confirmed that he had a solid alibi, having been 300 miles away in Minnesota at the time of the incident. The police obtained information from Chris about 2 phone calls he had with Drew. The first call was suddenly cut off, and the second call, which took place a few hours later, picked up background noises, including wind sounds and button pressing. The investigators went to the mall where Drew worked the next day to review the security footage. Although there were no cameras in the parking lot where Drew's car was parked, there were multiple cameras inside the mall. Upon reviewing the footage, detectives found a clip of Drew entering a store after her shift. At 4:55 p.m., she calmly purchased a purse, wearing a pink sweater and holding a jacket. After paying, she put on her jacket and left the store, calling Chris on her way out. This call was made at exactly 5 p.m. As we know, their conversation was suddenly interrupted at 5:04 p.m. after Drew said, "Okay." To recreate the events surrounding Drew's disappearance, a detective conducted an experiment. He set a timer for 4 minutes, the length of the interrupted call, and walked from the store where Drew bought her purse to the parking lot where her car was parked. When the timer went off, the detective had reached the parking lot near where Drew's car was found. This suggested that something must have happened to Drew while she was at her car. The investigation was hindered by the lack of surveillance cameras in the parking lot. Despite this challenge, Drew's disappearance generated widespread media attention, prompting a massive response from the public. Alongside the police, over 1,000 volunteers joined the search for Drew, and FBI officers were also involved in the investigation. Drew's last phone call was traced to Fisher, Minnesota, a 30-minute drive from her workplace. The surrounding area is rural, with vast fields. To search for clues, police used helicopters, all-terrain vehicles, horses, and dogs to scour the fields. They also asked local landowners to check their properties, but this initial search yielded no leads. As the investigation continued, the search area expanded daily. 4 days later, a boot was found under a bridge in Crookston, a small town about 30 miles from Grand Forks, where Drew vanished. Notably, a roommate remembered Drew wearing those boots on the day she disappeared. Forensic analysis later confirmed the boot belonged to Drew. In the Crookston area, further searches yielded no new leads, so the investigation turned its focus back to the Columbia Mall surveillance footage. This time, detectives scrutinized hundreds of hours of footage from various cameras, searching for signs of the abductor. They suspected that the person responsible might have been following Drew and could be visible in the footage. After hours of monitoring, the investigators identified a suspicious individual. The man was seen wandering aimlessly around the mall, not purchasing anything, and appeared more interested in observing the people around him than the products on sale. At 3:41 p.m., he sat down on a bench near the mall exit, continuing to watch people pass by. About 10 minutes later, he got up and walked away, wearing black gloves on his hands. After observing the man stand up and leave his seat, investigators made a crucial connection that he only did so when a blonde woman, pushing a grocery cart, walked by him and headed towards the parking lot. The detectives were convinced that this was not a mere coincidence, but rather the man had deliberately selected a potential target and was now following her. The police had no leads on the mysterious woman who was almost kidnapped at the mall, but Drew Shoden was the only person who vanished that day. Given their resemblance, it's possible the kidnapper had a specific type in mind, and so Drew was the next target. Drew left the mall around 5 p.m. when it was already dark, which could have made it easier for the perpetrator to strike. The investigation focused on 3 key locations: Grand Forks, where Drew was kidnapped; Fisher, where her phone was last active; and Crookston, where one of her shoes was found. The FBI reviewed the files of all registered sex offenders in these areas, comparing their photos to the image of the suspicious man from the mall. The only individual who fit the description was Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., a man with a criminal record marked by repeated offenses against women. Alfonso Rodriguez Jr., now 50, has spent 23 years in prison. He was born in Laredo, Texas, in 1953 to migrant worker parents. He was the second of 5 children. Rodriguez described his childhood as unhappy, citing his parents' excessive criticism and unreasonableness. For 15 years, his family moved from state to state before settling in Crookston in 1963. As he grew older, Rodriguez became increasingly isolated, partly due to language barriers. As a Spanish speaker, he struggled with English, making school challenging. He dropped out in the 9th grade and began working as a laborer at the American Crystal Sugar Company plant in Crookston. Rodriguez alleged that he was molested by older women during his youth, which he believed sparked his hostility towards women. In 1974, at 21, he asked a woman for a ride home, but instead took her to a driveway in Crookston, where he attacked her, grabbing her throat and trying to force her into submission. The following month, Rodriguez targeted another woman who was sitting in a parked truck outside a movie theater in Crookston. He threatened her with a knife and instructed her to follow him to a secluded rural area where he sexually assaulted her. In 1979, Rodriguez attempted to abduct a 69-year-old high school English teacher who was walking alone at night in Crookston. When he tried to force her into his car, she resisted. Enraged, Rodriguez stabbed her in the elbow and abdomen with a knife. Despite her injuries, she managed to escape and ran to safety. The teacher, who was also a skilled artist, created a composite sketch of Rodriguez that closely resembled him. This sketch ultimately led to his arrest. Rodriguez was found guilty of attempted kidnapping and aggravated assault, and he was sentenced to 23 years in prison. He served his sentence until his release in May 2003. Notably, Rodriguez was released from prison just 6 months before Drew's disappearance, and he was registered as a high-risk sex offender, indicating that he was likely to reoffend. Alfonso Rodriguez's family expressed concerns to the Minnesota Department of Corrections that he might revert to his old ways before his prison release. But he was released since he had served his full sentence. After his release, Rodriguez moved in with his mother in Crookston, near the bridge where Drew's shoe was found, which wasn't in his favor. Detectives questioned Rodriguez, who denied any involvement in Drew's disappearance. He claimed to have visited the Columbia Mall on the day she vanished, saying he watched the movie Once Upon a Time in Mexico at the movie theater. However, investigators discovered that no Grand Forks movie theaters were showing that film on that day. After searching Rodriguez's car, the police came to a sad realization: Drew was probably no longer alive. According to Grand Forks County Sheriff Dan Hill, the search had shifted from a rescue mission to a recovery effort. In the interior of Rodriguez's car, forensic experts discovered dark red stains in several areas, which were later confirmed to be Drew's blood. The blood was found on the rear passenger window, back seat, and 2 other areas in the passenger compartment. The DNA from the blood matched Drew's DNA, which was obtained from her toothbrush. A folding knife was found in the trunk of Rodriguez's car, which matched the sheath found in the parking lot near Drew's vehicle. A receipt showed that Rodriguez had purchased the knife and sheath from a nearby hardware store. Although Drew's body was not found, The evidence was sufficient to charge Rodriguez with her disappearance 8 days later. Rodriguez was arrested and held in a Grand Forks jail. He denied any involvement in Drew's disappearance and refused to cooperate with investigators. Despite the evidence against him, he refused to provide any information about Drew's whereabouts. During a brief bond hearing, his bail was set at $5 million. The search for Drew persisted despite the suspect's silence, focusing on 3 towns. However, the search was hampered by heavy, unprecedented snowfall in the area. To aid in the search, the governors of North Dakota and Minnesota held a press conference on December 9th, pledging to deploy several hundred National Guard members and state employees. North Dakota Governor John Hoeven expressed that Drew's disappearance had affected every North Dakotan, while Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty commended the community and police for their cooperation. Despite their efforts, no results were found, and the search was eventually suspended due to deteriorating weather conditions. When spring arrived, the search resumed with renewed intensity. As the winter snow began to melt, searchers hoped to finally find Drew after 5 long months. Unfortunately, it wasn't until April 17, 2004, that her body was discovered in a field in Crookston, just a few miles from where the boot was initially found. Drew's family was devastated when they received the heartbreaking news. Her father described the moment, saying that they had been waiting for that call, and when it came, it felt like time had stopped. This was their worst fear come true, and it would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The body was found in a field that had already been searched, but the large snowdrifts had concealed it. The circumstances of the crime were immediately apparent. Drew was naked from the waist down, her hands were tied behind her back, and a rope was around her neck. There were also signs of a plastic bag having been placed over her head before the rope was tied. DNA evidence linked to Rodriguez was found on Drew's jacket. An autopsy revealed that she had been subjected to a brutal beating and stabbing before her death. The medical examiner identified 3 possible causes of death: the neck wound, suffocation, or hypothermia. Drew Chaudin's family was finally able to say goodbye to her on April 24, 2004, after months of uncertainty. A mourning ceremony in North Dakota was attended by around 1,500 people. The crime involved both North Dakota and Minnesota, which made it a federal crime since Drew was taken across state lines. This meant the prosecutor's office could pursue the death penalty for Alfonso Rodriguez Jr. Rodriguez was found guilty of Drew's murder on August 30, 2006, and the jury recommended the death sentence. Judge Ralph Erickson sentenced him to death on February 8, 2007, citing the senseless and violent nature of his crime. Notably, Rodriguez became the first person to be sentenced to death in North Dakota in almost a century. However, even after 6 years on death row, Rodriguez refused to admit his guilt. It wasn't until June 28, 2013, that he finally confessed to kidnapping and killing Drew. But the story is not over yet. Ralph Erickson, a former district judge, became a U.S. Court of Appeals judge and later reversed his own decision that had sentenced Rodriguez to death. In 2021, he ordered a new sentencing phase, emphasized that Rodriguez's guilt was clear in question, confirmed by multiple DNA tests. The issue at hand is the appropriateness of the death penalty in this case. Erickson overturned the death sentence, citing 2 key reasons. Firstly, the defense attorneys failed to thoroughly investigate Rodriguez's mental health. Secondly, forensic expert Michael McGee's testimony was misleading. McGee claimed that Rodriguez had violated Drew's sexual integrity within 24 to 36 hours of her abduction, but there was no concrete evidence to support this, such as Rodriguez's seminal fluid on Drew's body. According to Erickson, McGee's opinion was not based on facts and misled him, influencing his original verdict. Despite reversing the death sentence, Erickson noted that the circumstances of Drew's body being found naked below the waist with her hands tied behind her back suggested a sexually motivated crime, even without Rodriguez's seminal fluid being present. Judge Erickson ruled that Alfonso Rodriguez's constitutional rights were violated because his mental health was not properly examined, both in general and at the time of his crime. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Carly McBride. Carly McBride was born on April 14, 1983, to Steve McBride and Lorraine Williams. As a child, she was cheerful and close to her parents. However, as she grew older, Carly struggled with addiction to alcohol and illegal substances. Despite these challenges, she made efforts to overcome them. In 2014, at the age of 31, Carly lived in Belmont, New South Wales, Australia, with her two children, 7-year-old William and 3-year-old Cadence. On September 30, 2014, Carly's boyfriend, Sale, took her to Muswellbrook, where her daughter Cadence lived with her father, Andrew Easton. Carly spent a few hours with Cadence at Andrew's house, arriving around 12:30 p.m. Sale dropped her off but did not stay, agreeing to return later that day. However, when Sale came back to pick Carly up, she was no longer at Andrew's house. According to Andrew, Carly and he got into an argument, and she left, planning to walk to the nearby McDonald's restaurant, about 20 minutes away. Sale was surprised when Carly didn't call to let him know where to meet her, so he tried calling her instead. However, he couldn't reach her. Assuming she had said she was going to McDonald's, Sale drove there to look for her. Along the way, he kept an eye out for her, thinking she might be waiting somewhere. He considered the possibility that her phone was dead, but he couldn't find her anywhere. She wasn't at McDonald's or anywhere nearby. Sale spent some time driving around Muswellbrook, but it was all in vain. Carly had seemingly vanished. When Carly failed to return home to Belmont that evening, Sale contacted the police. The detectives asked him to describe what had happened. Sale explained that their routine was always the same. He would drop her off, she would get out of the car, wave goodbye, and then call and text him twice to let him know she was safe. But on this particular day, things didn't go as usual. Sale dropped her off at 12:30 p.m., but never heard from her again. Despite trying to call and text her, the phone just rang out. A key question emerged. Did Carly leave her ex-partner Andrew Easton's house, or was he hiding something? Andrew claimed to be the last person to see her, but no one else could confirm she actually left his house. The police questioned neighbors and people along the route Carly would have taken to get to McDonald's, but nobody reported seeing her. This lack of eyewitnesses only fueled suspicion about Andrew. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras near Andrew's house to verify his claim that Carly left around 2 p.m. The police searched fields behind a nearby residential area, but the chief investigator reported that nothing significant was found. The investigation will continue, and the police are urging anyone with information about Carly's disappearance to come forward. She was last seen wearing blue jeans, sandals, and a yellow t-shirt, and carrying a tan handbag. Police investigators obtained a search warrant and thoroughly searched the house where Carly was last seen, looking for clues that could help explain her disappearance. Despite their efforts, they found no evidence of criminal activity or new leads. However, they did stumble upon a suspicious discovery. Carly's Facebook account had been deleted just a few hours after she went missing, and before anyone had even reported her disappearance to the authorities. This mysterious deletion sparked a lot of questions and prompted further investigation. 9 months after Carly's disappearance, her parents, Steve and Lorraine Williams, sought assistance in finding their daughter. With the help of Detective Timothy Seymour, they made a public appeal, requesting any information that could aid in the case. During the appeal, Lorraine became emotional and pleaded for help, saying that if anyone knew anything, no matter how small, they should come forward and help them. The family has struggled since Carly's disappearance, with Steve and Lorraine explaining that their situation is complicated, particularly when it comes to Carly's children. The children have 2 different fathers, and the family has had limited contact with them. Steve and Lorraine hope that this will change, allowing them to reconnect with their grandchildren. Lorraine expressed the deep sorrow of Carly's children, who would never again experience their mother's loving kisses, warm hugs, and laughter. They were unable to say goodbye, and their memories were frozen in time. She described the family's pain and frustration, feeling trapped in limbo, and emphasized their need to find Carly and give her dignity and respect in death. Carly's children, William and Cadence, needed to know what happened to their mother to heal and move forward, free from the burden of pain and uncertainty. Lorraine begged for the truth, expressing that while her daughter was gone, her children needed closure and justice. She implored the responsible person to come forward, break their silence, and let the family find peace. The police shifted their focus to Sale Newson, another possible suspect, as they were unable to connect Carly's disappearance to her ex-partner, Andrew Easton. Investigations revealed that Carly and Sale's relationship was troubled. Sale was extremely jealous, which often sparked their arguments, despite their relatively short time together. Although Sale publicly claimed to be deeply in love with Carly, saying she was the first woman he had loved in 14 years, his actions told a different story. He started intimate relationships with other women almost immediately, even offering sex to several women just hours after reporting Carly missing. On October 2nd, just 2 days after Carly's disappearance, Sale spent the night with another woman, yet in public, he pretended to be grief-stricken over losing the love of his life. Detectives also learned that Sale and Carly had an argument 2 days before she vanished, triggered by Facebook messages from other men. However, while this evidence was suspicious, it was still circumstantial, and the police needed more concrete evidence to bring charges against Sale Newson. In 2015, authorities searched 3 properties in Muswellbrook and Scone, Wales, seizing 3 firearms, illegal substances, and arresting 24-year-old James Kineen, unrelated to Carly's disappearance, but a notable name in the investigation. 2 years after, on September 30, 2014, the police investigation had stalled with no new leads. But on August 7, 2016, a major breakthrough came when 2 pedestrians stumbled upon human remains in a shallow grave in a bush off the road near Scone. Forensic analysis confirmed that the remains were indeed those of Carly McBride. The police waited 4 days before announcing the discovery, hoping to gather more evidence. Carly's parents, who are still grieving, are asking the public to come forward with any information they might have. They are thankful for the help that led to finding their daughter's body, but they still want to know who was responsible for her disappearance and are seeking closure. Over 10 months, investigators probed a case, leading to Sale Newson's arrest warrant on June 19, 2017. After his arrest, Newson denied involvement in Carly McBride's death. Authorities also charged James Kineen, 26, for helping Newson dispose of the body. The 3 knew each other from a rehab center for addicts, staying in touch despite leaving at different times. The trial of Sale Newson began in 2018 and lasted for years due to limited evidence. Prosecutors claimed Newson attacked Carly in a jealous rage, causing her death. Forensic experts found she died from multiple blunt force trauma, including 23 skull fractures and 13 torso and spinal fractures. The judge ruled Newson's actions caused Carly's death, noting he had claimed to be a skilled mixed martial arts fighter with 20 undefeated fights. The judge concluded Carly died from severe brain trauma caused by a high degree of force to the head, likely inflicted by Newson's fists, feet, or objects. During a search of Newson's house, police found a map in a shoebox under the bed with a circle around Muswellbrook and Scone, where Carly's remains were later found. The map also had numbers 1, 2, and 3 written on it, which a senior constable linked to point-to-point cameras. Newson mentioned to Carly's father that the skeleton was missing hand bones, a detail only known to the police, Carly's parents, and the forensic medicine department. This suggested Newson was familiar with the crime scene and had left Carly's body there. The clothes on the remains matched what she wore on the day she disappeared, indicating she died soon after leaving her partner's house. The police couldn't find her purse and phone. When police searched Newson's mobile phone, they discovered he had deleted Google location services between September 18th and October 2nd, 2014. During the trial, the investigators learned that the photo of Carly, which Newson took on the way to Muswell Brook and later used in missing person flyers, was edited and cropped even before the police received the report of Carly missing. When the search for Carly began, Newson offered a $20,000 reward for information about her whereabouts. However, his bank account showed he was broke, which meant he offered the reward only because he knew no one would ever find her. Thus, he wouldn't have to pay. Newson injected himself into the police investigation from the start, trying to deflect suspicion onto others and attempting to get information about where police and other emergency services would be searching. He also conducted a canvass of the neighboring streets, searching for CCTV or witnesses, which police said was done not to find information, but to suppress it and to determine if anyone had seen him intercepting Ms. McBride. While volunteers and police searched for her around Muswell Brook and handed out missing person flyers, Newson was in Sydney messaging friends about how he was driving an Audi R8. The more investigators dug into Newson, interviewed him, looked at his Facebook messages, listened to his phone calls. After examining his internet search history, investigators discovered that he was looking for information on how to delete a Facebook account. His account remained active, but Carly's account got deleted shortly after. Although all the evidence was circumstantial, the prosecutors said they did have puzzle pieces that began to reveal a picture when put together. Eventually, these pieces turned into an irrefutable case, ruling out any other possible explanations for how Carly McBride disappeared and how her body was about 82 feet from the side of the road. The judge found that Newson's motive for suddenly and violently attacking Carly was jealousy. Newson had gone to pick Carly up from Muswell Brook, expecting her to have spent time with her daughter as planned. Instead, he discovered she had met her ex-partner for 90 minutes. This revelation allegedly triggered a fit of jealousy in Newson, leading him to brutally attack Carly. Carly's mother, Lorraine Williams, recounted the immense grief and anxiety she experienced during a 2-year wait for justice. A wait that ended with the devastating realization that her happy and outgoing daughter would never come home to her 2 young children. When she finally saw Carly again, it was in the morgue, an experience she described as the worst day of her life. In December 2021, 43-year-old Newson was found guilty and sentenced to 27 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 2038, nearly 7 years after reporting Carly missing. Despite the guilty verdict, Newson maintained his innocence, stating to the judge. Newson's accomplice, James Caneen, also denied his involvement but was found guilty by a jury in July 2022. The judge determined that Caneen had lied to police 3 times to create a false alibi for Newson and deleted phone data to conceal his actions. At the time of his involvement in the Carly McBride case, Caneen was already in prison for illegal weapons possession and prohibited substances. In November 2022, he was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison with a 4-year parole period, showing little reaction to the news. After the trial, Carly's parents expressed relief that justice had been served, but they also acknowledged that no matter the outcome, they would never be able to get their daughter back. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Corey Desmond. Corey Desmond was born on March 18, 1980, at Torrance Memorial Hospital, where she immediately faced a life-or-death struggle due to a hole in her diaphragm. Despite the odds against her, Corey underwent multiple surgeries and defied a 20% chance of survival, not only recovering but thriving as well. Those who knew Corey described her as a bright, self-assured young woman who wasn't afraid to speak her mind. She was energetic, affectionate, and cared deeply for many people. After graduating from North Torrance High School, Corey earned a master's degree in criminal justice from Long Beach State. However, she later changed her mind and decided to pursue a teaching career. Sadly, Corey's life was cut short, but just a week after her passing, a notice arrived in the mail confirming that she had earned her teaching credential. Corey was loved by many and had a special gift for connecting with people. Corey had formed close bonds with her co-workers at various bars and restaurants, which made her want to continue working in the industry despite her family's disapproval. On Saturday, February 14, 2009, Corey finished her shift at a bar at 9:30 p.m. and walked 2 blocks to Street Lounge, a popular bar where many of her friends worked. Surveillance cameras captured her helping out her friends at the bar until it closed around 2 a.m. After that, none of her friends saw her again. 2 days later, on Monday, February 16th, at around 2:20 p.m., the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office received a call from a driver who was about 100 miles away from the bar where Corey was last seen. The driver had stopped to remove snow chains from his tires when he noticed a strong, unpleasant odor. Initially, he thought it was from an animal that had been hit by a car, but he decided to investigate. A short distance from his car, he found a black plastic garbage bag containing a woman's body. Panicked, the driver ran into the road, flagging down cars and asking someone to call the police, as his phone was out of PIN. The victim, 28-year-old Corey Day Desmond, was identified through fingerprints and her driver's license. She had suffered a brutal attack, dying from strangulation, with multiple bruises on her face and neck, and head injuries. Despite her efforts to fight back, evident from defense wounds, she succumbed to the assault. Although the exact time of death couldn't be determined, experts estimated that Corey's body had been lying on the street for 12 to 36 hours before it was discovered. Notably, her pants were found unbuttoned and pulled down to her knees, but there was no evidence of sexual assault. Investigators concluded that the location where the body was found was not the site of the murder. The killer likely dumped Corey's body by the side of the road and hoping it would take time for it to be discovered. Before the police found her body, a rainstorm had washed away any potential evidence. Breaking the news to families of the deceased or missing is one of the toughest parts of a policeman's job. The news of Corey's body being discovered in a garbage bag was devastating for her grandmother, with whom Corey was living, and just as shocking for Mark, Corey's father. Mark was well aware of how the system worked and knew that investigations could be delayed for months due to the need for warrants for searches, interrogations, and fingerprinting. He also knew that bureaucratic red tape could slow down the process of solving a crime. Instead of waiting for the police to find Corey's killer, Mark decided to take matters into his own hands. Driven by his love for his daughter, Mark began searching for the person responsible. He discovered Corey's abandoned Jeep Wrangler in an alley near the bar where she worked. He also learned that Corey had gone missing on the night of February 15th, although no one had realized it at the time. Corey's grandmother hadn't been alarmed because Corey was an adult and could have stayed overnight at a friend's house. To piece together the events of the evening, investigators visited the bar where Corey worked as a waitress. They spoke with her co-workers, who revealed that Corey had finished her shift at 9:30 p.m. and then headed to another bar where her friends were working. This was a common routine for Corey, as she would often socialize with her friends and even lend a hand at the bar, earning extra tips in the process. Many regulars at the bar recognized Corey and thought she was a part of the staff. Security cameras confirmed this account, capturing footage of Corey assisting her friends behind the counter. However, on this evening, Corey's luck took a turn for the worse. She got into an argument with a drunk and disorderly man who was making inappropriate comments and inappropriately touching women. When a disruptive man showed up at the bar, Corey stood up for the other patrons and told him he wasn't welcome. The man became furious, but eventually agreed to leave. Corey went back to helping her friends and serving drinks as if nothing had happened. And even though she drank some alcohol that evening, it didn't seem to affect her behavior. After 2 a.m., Corey left the bar alone, planning to head home. But tragically, her body was found 100 miles away the next day. Mark helped the police by sharing any information he could find on TV and appealed to others to come forward with any crucial details. Meanwhile, the police identified the man who had gotten into a fight with Corey before her death. When questioned by investigators, the man claimed not to know Corey Desmond, but admitted to having a big fight with a woman at a bar on February 14th. He blamed his behavior on alcohol, saying it made him lose control, and confirmed that he was kicked out of the bar afterwards and went home to sleep. The man denied any involvement in the crime and agreed to take a polygraph test and let the police search his house and car. The investigators thoroughly searched the suspect's car, looking for any signs of evidence, such as bloodstains, hair, or personal belongings of Corey. Despite the car being dirty inside and out, forensic experts found nothing. They also searched his house, but found no indication of his involvement in the crime. The police then turned to a polygraph test as their last hope to catch the suspect, but he passed it easily, answering all their questions. His wife corroborated his alibi, stating that he returned home before 2 a.m. and went straight to bed. Since Corey left the bar around 2 a.m., it seemed clear that this man was not involved in her death. Consequently, the police removed him from their list of suspects, but they were left with no other leads or persons of interest in the investigation. Investigators looked into her personal life to see if she had any enemies who might have wanted to harm her. They discovered a strange detail. Corey had stopped by the bar where she worked to ask to use the restroom, but the owner refused since the bar was closed and told her to go home. This was around 2:20 a.m., but what happened after that remains unknown because Corey never got in her car and didn't go home. The investigators thought that Corey might have been abducted or attacked near her workplace, but the bar's security cameras didn't capture anything, and there were no witnesses on the street at that late hour. When Corey died, her blood alcohol level was more than 4 times the legal limit for driving, but it's unclear whether she was planning to drive or looking for another way to get home. Unfortunately, Corey didn't encounter anyone who could help her that night. A month into the investigation, the police had checked all leads and found no new suspects, reaching a dead end. However, Corey's father, Mark, was not ready to give up. He rented 3 billboards on Aria Boulevard in Redondo Beach. Information about Corey was displayed on 50 electronic billboards, which eventually led to a breakthrough in the case. In May 2009, the police received a call from a woman named Tiffany who had seen Corey's photo on one of the billboards. Tiffany's tip helped the police solve the case. She was clearly nervous and upset, speaking quietly and rambling at first. However, she eventually composed herself and explained that she thought her boyfriend, Tony Lopez Perez, might have killed Corey Desmond. She added that he had been acting strangely and that she would like to talk to them more about it in person. Tiffany arranged to meet with the detective in a park where she shared her suspicions. She told him that on Valentine's Day, she and Tony had planned a romantic dinner. She spent the evening getting ready, dropping off her kids at her parents' house, getting her hair done, and buying a new red dress, which Tony particularly liked. Tony was working that day, but was supposed to come home around 11:30 p.m. Tiffany waited up for Tony all night, but he didn't respond to her calls and messages. When he finally returned home at 4:30 a.m., he claimed to be too drunk to drive and said he had fallen asleep in his car. Tiffany found this suspicious, especially since Tony rarely cleaned his car, but afterwards, he suddenly bought cleaning products and washed the car thoroughly, refusing her help. A few days later, Tony sold his white Dodge for a low price and bought a new car without explanation. He also changed his phone number for no apparent reason. On their trip to Big Bear Lake, Tony's behavior seemed normal at first, but then he stopped the car and asked Tiffany if she thought the body of a murdered bartender had been dumped there. He seemed certain that the police had found her body in that exact location. Tony Lopez Perez and Tiffany had lived together for about 4 years and had a 6-year-old son, but they were never married. Tony was a hard-working and well-liked man with no criminal record. He came from a large family with 8 siblings, and his parents had grown up in the LA area. Tony had attended high school in Manhattan Beach. However, after Corey Desmond's death, Tiffany began to notice some suspicious behavior from Tony. He was absent on the day of Corey's death, and later he was seen cleaning his car urgently and trying to sell it quickly. He also made a strange comment about where the police found Corey's body. Additionally, he changed his phone number and displayed odd behavior. When Tiffany connected these dots, she realized that Tony might be involved in Corey's death. She was hesitant to believe it, but she agreed to cooperate with the investigators. They decided to interview Tony at his house, making it seem like a routine witness inquiry into Corey's case. Tiffany played along, not revealing to Tony that she suspected him. During the interview, Tony appeared calm and composed, answering questions without showing any nervousness. He claimed he didn't know Corey, saying he had only seen her in the newspapers. To gather enough evidence to arrest Tony Lopez Perez for Corey's murder, the police needed concrete proof. They tracked down the new owner of the Dodge that Tony had sold quickly after Corey's death was reported. The new owner confirmed that Tony had sold him the car at a suspiciously low price and allowed the police to search the vehicle for clues. Tiffany revealed that Tony had thoroughly cleaned the interior before selling it, but the police discovered something incriminating when they used luminol and an ultraviolet lamp to examine the car. This revealed why Tony had been to get rid of his car. The police arrested Tony and took him to the station, without revealing what they had discovered. Initially, Tony denied knowing Corey, but later changed his story, claiming he had seen her outside a bar and whistled at her. However, when the police showed him photos of a car he had sold, which contained crucial evidence, Tony's story changed again. This time, Tony claimed that Corey had become unconscious on the sidewalk outside the bar. He said he tried to help her, but she woke up screaming and told him to leave her alone. Tony alleged that, in fear, he covered her mouth and accidentally strangled her. Panicked that he would be blamed for Corey's death, Tony placed her body in the back seat of his car and drove home. He said he woke up in the middle of the night, checked on the body, and realized it wasn't just a nightmare. The next morning, Tony went to work with Corey's body still in the car. After his shift, he put the body in 2 garbage bags and abandoned it in a remote area. Tony claimed that he accidentally strangled Corey while drunk and scared, but the evidence suggested otherwise. Corey's injuries were severe, including head wounds, facial and neck bruises, and defensive wounds on her hands. Her pants were also found down to her knees, implying a more deliberate and violent act. Tony was arrested and charged with first-degree deprivation of life. He led the police to Corey's body the next day. The investigation produced DNA evidence, which matched Corey's blood to blood found in the car Tony sold shortly after the crime. At the 2011 trial, Coroner Jack Sheraton testified to the extent of Corey's injuries, including multiple head contusions, signs of strangulation, and blunt force trauma to her face. He also found scratches on her body, indicating that the killer had dragged her after death. Prosecutors argued that Tony had assaulted Corey, attempting to force her into sexual intimacy in the early morning of February 15, 2009. When Corey resisted, Tony strangled her. Tiffany Ware, a former girlfriend of Tony's, testified at the trial, revealing that Tony had an insatiable appetite for sex in January and February 2009. Despite their frequent daily sexual encounters, Perez remained unsatisfied. Additionally, Tiffany revealed to the court that Tony had forced himself on her without her consent on 2 separate occasions. These incidents took place about a month apart, shortly after the birth of their son. On both occasions, Tiffany was unconscious on the couch, having taken painkillers for severe back pain. Perez spoke to the court for the first time during his sentencing. He acknowledged that he had strayed from the values of love and respect he was taught, which normally made him a caring father, uncle, and family provider. He admitted that he failed to live up to these principles and fell short. Perez largely stuck to the version of events presented by his lawyer, Andrew Hanel, during the trial. According to Hanel, Perez found the victim, Corey, unconscious on the sidewalk and tried to calm her down, but didn't intend to harm her. Perez expressed regret, saying that he should have taken a moment to think before acting. Instead, he let fear take over and acted carelessly. Corey's father, Mark Desmond, mourned the loss of his 28-year-old daughter, who had a promising future ahead of her. He condemned Perez, saying that he not only took Corey's life, but also crushed the hopes and dreams of his own children. Mark Desmond described Perez as embodying the characteristics that women often fear in society. Before being sentenced, Perez asked God in court to show him mercy and apologized to both the Desmond family and his own family for causing them harm. He acknowledged that his actions would have a lasting impact on the Desmond family's lives. Desmond's grandmother, Beverly, expressed her desire for Perez to never be released from prison and to suffer as much as her granddaughter had. In July 2011, a jury found Tony Lopez Perez guilty of first-degree deprivation of life, resulting in a life imprisonment sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Corey Desmond's family thanked Tiffany, whose information helped the police solve the case. A family friend, Leslie Schwab, attended the trial and credited Tiffany with helping the police catch Perez, saying that without her, they might not have identified him as the perpetrator. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Tess Ritchie. Tess Ritchie was the youngest of 5 sisters, born on November 30th, 1994. She spent her childhood in North Bay before moving to Toronto at the age of 19. According to her sister Verena, Tess loved her life, dogs, and family. She worked as a waitress in Toronto, but her dream job was to become a flight attendant and travel the world. Although Tess struggled to find a job she liked, her family was always willing to support her financially. Some sources suggest that after failing to find work at an airline or hotel, she began learning Italian and searching for job opportunities in Italy online. Tess also created content on YouTube, with her last video uploaded on February 23, 2014, nearly 4 years before the events we will discuss. In that video, Tess shared her personal experiences and the challenges she faced. Tess explained that she searched everywhere for someone who would understand and relate to what she was experiencing, but she never found that. She said her boyfriend's physical abuse is never acceptable, no matter how minor it may seem. She stated that he hit her, and even downplaying it as just throwing a purse at her is embarrassing because it happened in his bedroom, and it's a sad reality. After recording this video, Tess mentioned that she faced more personal struggles. In 2017, she experienced a devastating breakup with her boyfriend Julian on November 23rd. The next day, she turned to her older sister Rachel, who was not only 8 years older, but also her closest confidant. Tess recounted that she spent most of November 24th at Rachel's house in Toronto, where they discussed her breakup, went shopping, and visited a dog park. Rachel had to encourage her to eat dinner because she had lost her appetite due to stress. Despite her emotional state, Tess made plans to meet an old school friend, Riley Samar, that night. Samar was from North Bay, and she had moved to Toronto in the summer of 2017. They hadn't seen each other in years, but now that they were both living in the same city, they had started talking again. Samar suggested they go to Cruise and Tango, a well-known drag bar in the Church in Wellesley area, that evening. Rachel's partner arranged for Ritchie to take an Uber to meet Samar downtown. Ritchie saw her sister Tess running out to catch the Uber, which was the last time she would ever see her alive. Ritchie arrived at the Cruise and Tango Club around midnight, but Samar wasn't there yet. The club was packed, and Tess sent a text to her sister to let her know she had arrived safely. The next morning, Richie sent a text to her sister, not expecting a quick response since Tess had been out late the night before. However, by 6:30 p.m., Richie still hadn't heard back from Tess. She then discovered that none of her texts had been delivered to Tess's phone. When Richie tried calling, the calls went straight to voicemail. Their mother, Christine Hermiston, also attempted to contact Tess, but her phone was turned off. Christine got a notification that her daughter Tess had ordered an Uber at 4:02 a.m., but then the ride was canceled. This happened because Tess had used Christine's credit card to set up her Uber account, so Christine received updates on all of Tess's Uber rides. When Christine and her family couldn't reach Tess during the day and her phone stayed off, they started to worry because Tess always kept in touch with them. Rachel typically kept her phone with her at all times. On Saturday night around 9 p.m., she asked her partner to check on her sister's apartment in Scarborough while she reached out to her friends. Tess was still missing, and her family was growing increasingly worried. Rachel began calling hospitals and also contacted the police. By the following evening, the police had no updates for Tess's family. Multiple officers were assigned to search for Tess Richie, but no one had seen or heard from her in the past 2 days. On Monday, Tess's mother, Christine, and one of her sisters traveled from North Bay to Toronto to help with the search. They distributed flyers featuring Tess's picture, hoping someone might recognize her. The family did everything they could, but unfortunately, the police's investigation into Tess's disappearance was lacking. Meanwhile, Tess's friend Riley, who had gone to the bar with her that night, returned home safely. When asked about Tess's whereabouts, Riley mentioned that they had both been drinking heavily, which led to the bar's security asking them to leave. They left the bar shortly after 2 a.m. and headed to Wellesley Street to grab a bite to eat. On their way, they met a guy who decided to join them, but Riley couldn't remember his name. Once on Wellesley Street, they ordered hot dogs. Tess asked for a vegetarian hot dog, which led to a disagreement with the vendor. Tess thought she received a meat hot dog, and Riley noted that Tess accidentally sprayed mustard all over the vendor's cart. After that, Tess, Riley, and their new companion ran to Dundonald Street. There, they encountered a woman named Michelle on her porch and struck up a conversation that lasted about 20 minutes. Tess confided in Michelle about her recent breakup and how difficult it had been for her. Michelle offered her support, and they even exchanged phone numbers. Michelle observed that Richie seemed to be trying to enjoy himself, but when she looked into his eyes, she noticed a deep sadness. The breakup with Julian seemed to be affecting Riley heavily. Riley reassured her that things would improve and encouraged her to stay strong. At 4 a.m., Riley got a text from her boyfriend asking her to come home. She said goodbye to Tess and headed towards Yonge Street before going home. Tess felt let down that Riley had left so early. At 4:02 a.m., she ordered an Uber, suggesting that she decided to go home too after Riley left. The Uber driver arrived at 4:14 a.m., but Tess was not there. On Wednesday, November 29th, just a day before Tess's 23rd birthday, Christine began handing out flyers with her daughter's picture in the area where Tess was last seen. Since Riley had separated from Tess on Dundonald Street, Christine decided to investigate that area. She reached out to Anne Brazo, a nurse at St. Michael's Hospital, knowing their daughters had been friends since elementary school in North Bay. Together, they began searching for Richie as efforts intensified and social media campaigns aimed to find her. During this time, Brazo made a chilling discovery while looking into the bottom of an outdoor stairwell at a construction site located at 582 Church Street. She immediately recognized Richie's body lying on the concrete. "I was in complete shock, horror, disbelief. I couldn't understand what I was seeing," said Anne, fighting back tears. Feeling frightened, she noticed dust from a nearby gravel pile settled on Richie's body. Brazo let go of the staircase railing and stepped back down the gravel driveway toward Church Street. Meanwhile, Hermiston was further up the sidewalk, unaware that her daughter's body was so near. Brazo called out to her, "Christine, come back here. There's a girl in the stairwell. You need to come back." Hermiston turned and ran down the driveway, stopping suddenly at the stairwell. After a few moments, she began to scream, pleading with God for assistance. Tessa's death presented a heartbreaking event for her entire family. They discovered her body only 300 yards from the bar where she had been before disappearing, and just 20 yards from the last place her friend Riley saw her. This situation raised many questions about the police's response, especially since her body had been found just a couple of blocks from the bar. After Anne and Christine located Tessa's body, an anonymous police source shared new information with the media. It was reported that Tessa had advertised her intimate services online and had worked at a strip club. Tessa's mother stated that the Toronto police did not adequately search for Richie because they assumed she was an escort. This assumption was horrifying to Hermiston, who expressed her anger at the media's portrayal. After Richie's body was found, police sources claimed she was involved in the sex trade, which Hermiston called a blatant lie. They spread this information to suggest she led a high-risk lifestyle, deflecting blame from themselves. Although Tess briefly worked as a waitress at a strip club, she quit less than 2 weeks after starting. The mention of intimate services was linked to a dating site account, not a profession. Despite the discovery of Richie's body, the circumstances of her death remained unclear. Initially, police did not suspect foul play, but the homicide unit took over when an autopsy indicated she had died from neck compression. Additionally, they discovered seminal fluid on her clothing and saliva on her bra. DNA tests revealed male DNA, prompting police to begin searching for a suspect. Based on Riley's testimony, detectives aimed to identify the man Tess had met that night, as he was the person she spent time with after Riley went home. The police examined CCTV footage to gather information about that night. The video shows Tess and Riley leaving the bar and heading towards a hot dog vendor. There were also cameras on the building near where Anne discovered the body. After reviewing the recordings, the police observed Tess and an unidentified man walking hand in hand up the gravel driveway. According to the police, the camera captured Tess and this unknown man at 4:14 a.m. A subsequent recording taken 46 minutes later showed the man leaving the location alone, with no further footage of Tess. This led the police to consider him the main suspect in the Tess Richie case. On December 10th, during a press conference, the Toronto police released images of him obtained from the surveillance footage. They hoped that someone would be able to identify him. The police discovered the identity of the man after seeing the published images. He called the police station himself and stated that he was the guy in the photo. The person who was with Tess that night was identified as 21-year-old Colin Schlatter. In the fall of 2017, Schlatter was 21 years old and living with his parents and younger brother in their home in North Toronto. He had completed a year of postgraduate studies to become a car mechanic and was working with his father in construction. Schlatter, along with his parents and one of his lawyers, visited the police station where he spoke briefly with detectives but chose not to testify. But finally, they provided the police with important evidence. While still at the police station, Schlatter discarded an empty water bottle in a trash can. The police took the bottle and sent it for forensic analysis. After some time, they found that the DNA on the bottle matched DNA samples taken from seminal fluid and saliva found on Tess Richie's body, indicating that they came from the same person. Police planned an undercover operation to observe Schlatter for several weeks, but the DNA results sped up their timeline. Schlatter was arrested at approximately 11 p.m. on February 4, 2018, after watching the Super Bowl with his family at a cinema. He was taken to the 13th Division and placed in a holding cell at 3:19 a.m. on February 5th. Two other men were in holding cells next to him, both of whom were undercover police officers. Schlatter was unaware that he was about to provide them with a significant amount of evidence. The three men were in plain holding cells, each containing a combination toilet, sink, and bed. In the cell, Schlatter discussed his love for card games and claimed he had a knack for attracting women. He bragged about having slept with over 40 women, even though he was only 21. Schlatter did not encounter Tess and her friend Riley on the street. He saw them for the first time in the same bar where he was present. This recording was made just before security asked Tess and Riley to leave the bar. Schlatter also spoke to undercover officers about Tess. Initially, he claimed she was alive when he departed. However, he later suggested that something might have happened because alcohol had clouded his memory. He doubted his own capability. The police charged Ken Schlatter with the murder of Tess Ritchie, but he denied the accusation. In June 2018, police officers Alan McCullough and Michael Jones were charged with 2 counts of misconduct for neglect of duty under Ontario's Police Services Act. The report of hearing stated that they allegedly failed to thoroughly search the nearby property or immediate area, interview neighbors, and inform a supervisor. If they had followed protocol, Christine Hermiston stated, they would have found her. She was lying just around the corner. During the 2020 trial of Ken Schlatter, his defense argued that someone else could have approached the stairs where Tess was lying by climbing over the fence on the other side of the building, thus avoiding the cameras. The lawyers even named another suspect, but the police thoroughly investigated and interrogated this person, finding no evidence linking him to Tess's death. DNA evidence pointed to only one person, Ken Schlatter. Schlatter, a slight man who appeared soft-spoken in court, explained that he has a speech defect, causing him to slur his words and stutter sometimes. He claimed that Tess offered him a place to hide from prying eyes at 4:02 a.m., which explained the presence of his DNA on her belongings. Tess Ritchie had ordered an Uber, but when the driver arrived at the pickup point at 4:14 a.m., she wasn't there. Instead, Calvin Schlatter approached her again. They sat down on a bench at the corner of street. Schlatter stated that Tess seemed upset after their argument, so he went over to check on her. Schlatter claimed Tess asked him to sit and talk, but with no audio on security videos, it can't be confirmed. He said she was upset about her breakup, so he shared a similar experience to comfort her. Schlatter claimed that later, Tess asked if it was okay to kiss him. He said they stood up, hugged, and kissed each other. However, there is no footage of this kiss on the available CCTV footage. Schlatter claims that Tess Ritchie asked him to accompany her to the driveway at 582 Church Street and then down the outdoor stairwell. However, the prosecution questioned his motives, as an Uber driver was waiting for Tess at the time. It is unclear what Schlatter said to Tess to persuade her to walk with him into the darkness at 4 a.m. According to Schlatter, they kissed for a long time, and he ejaculated in his pants. He wanted to take things further, but Tess refused. Schlatter states that after this, he invited Tess to his house, but she declined and told him to leave. He claims that he left, and Tess was alive when he departed. There were only 2 people who knew the truth about the events of that night. Unfortunately, one of them had already passed away. During the trial, the prosecution presented 2 key witnesses, Riley, a friend of Tess, and Michelle Tepp, a woman who had spoken with Tess and Schlatter that night. Both Riley and Michelle identified Schlatter. In addition to talking to 2 undercover police officers, Schlatter is also alleged to have shared important details with a cellmate, known only as ES due to a publication ban, when they were both being held at a Toronto detention center for about 2 months in 2018. ES has a long history of criminal activity, including multiple break-ins and a domestic assault. The informant, who shared a cell with Calvin Schlatter, initially felt sympathetic towards Schlatter because he was a young man experiencing imprisonment for the first time. However, as time passed, his opinion of Schlatter changed. Schlatter would often cry himself to sleep, claiming he didn't want to serve his sentence and missing his mother. Despite this, Schlatter showed no regret when discussing the death of Tess Ritchie. According to him, Schlatter admitted to kissing Ritchie and losing control when she refused to go further, ultimately strangling her with a scarf. In court, Schlatter denied having these conversations with the informant, and his lawyer portrayed the informant as a deceitful liar. Nevertheless, physical evidence suggests that Ritchie was strangled, and only Schlatter's DNA was found on her clothing. In her final statement to the jury, defense attorney Lydia Riva presented her client, Schlatter, as a harmless and innocent young man. She acknowledged that it can be difficult to accept, but the criminal justice system is not infallible and can sometimes make mistakes. On March 23, 2020, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, and the judge sentenced Schlatter to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The trial was emotionally devastating for Ritchie's family and supporters, who were often left reeling and in tears in the courtroom. Tess's death has left the family feeling guilty and broken, struggling to look at each other. They're seeking $20 million in damages, including punitive damages, to ensure justice for their daughter. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Mindy Morgenstern. Mindy Morgenstern was born on April 29, 1984, in Bogota, Colombia. She was adopted by Eunice and Larry Morgenstern, farmers from New Salem, North Dakota, USA, who already had a biological daughter named Rebecca. They had previously adopted a boy named Michael, and then, 10 years later, they adopted April, also from Colombia. When they discovered April had a younger sister, Mindy, they adopted her as well, making her their fourth child and third adopted child. Growing up on the farm was ideal for Mindy. She enjoyed horseback riding, playing basketball, and helping her parents with farm work, including driving a tractor. After graduating from high school, Mindy left New Salem and moved to Valley City, where she thrived in student life. Her outgoing and cheerful personality quickly helped her make many new friends. Mindy was a dedicated student who balanced her studies with a part-time job as a waitress at a local restaurant. It seemed like she was on the verge of achieving her goals, but her life took a devastating turn. Mindy's friends and family noticed that she was unreachable on September 13, 2006, which was unusual because she was always quick to respond to calls and messages. Concerned about her whereabouts, her friends Tony and Danielle decided to visit her apartment to check on her. When they arrived, they saw her car parked in the lot, which indicated that she was likely at home. Danielle waited in the car while Tony went up to Mindy's second-floor apartment. Despite knocking on the door, there was no response. Tony entered the dark apartment, stumbled upon a disturbing sight, and turned on the light to reveal Mindy's body with neck injuries. Overcome with shock, Tony ran outside to inform Danielle, still waiting in the car. Mindy's friends entered her apartment, but they were met with a disturbing scene. Mindy's neck had knife wounds, and an empty bottle of cleaning agent lay nearby, its strong smell permeating the air. Danielle quickly called 911 to report the discovery of her friend's body. As they waited for help to arrive, a neighbor from the same floor, who had been alerted by the noise, came to investigate. He approached Mindy, checked her pulse, and sadly announced that she had passed away. Soon after, the police arrived at the apartment. Upon entering, the detectives were immediately struck by the overpowering smell of the cleaning agent. They found Mindy's body lying in the living room, with a belt wrapped around her neck and a broken knife protruding from it. The handle of the murder weapon was found next to Mindy's body. In an attempt to destroy evidence, the killer used a cleaning agent, but forensic experts still managed to find crucial evidence, including skin particles under Mindy's left-hand fingernails, indicating that she fought back against her attacker. As investigators searched for a motive, they quickly dismissed the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. Mindy's purse, phone, wallet, and cash were all still present, untouched, and her jewelry remained unaffected. it seemed that the attacker's intentions were not financially driven. The presence of a basket of clean laundry near Mindy's body suggested that she was attacked immediately after entering her apartment. Furthermore, there were no signs of forced entry on the front door, implying that the killer either knew Mindy or entered the apartment shortly after she did. The next day, the detectives informed the Morgenstern family that Mindy had passed away. The news brought grief to her parents, brother, and sisters. The family was confused, as Mindy was well liked by everyone and had no known enemies. Her friends had no history of trouble with the law. Mindy's friends, Tony and Danielle, revealed to investigators that they were not alone in the apartment. A neighbor from the same floor had entered Mindy's apartment after hearing their screams. He attempted to check Mindy's pulse, pronouncing her dead. When questioned, the neighbor explained that he had used the back of his hand to avoid leaving his fingerprints on Mindy's wrist. When questioned about the scratches, Robert Lind claimed they were work-related injuries, explaining that his job working with steel often left him with scratches. He said he had been at work from 7 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. the previous day. The investigators verified his alibi by contacting his employer, who confirmed Robert's schedule and explained that scratches were a common occupational hazard. Despite this, the investigators remained skeptical and asked Robert to provide a DNA sample, which he willingly supplied. To aid in their investigation, the police sent a sample to the lab to compare it with the one found under Mindy's fingernails. They also questioned all of Mindy's friends, but no leads came from these interviews. Everyone claimed that Mindy didn't have any conflicts with anyone. While waiting for DNA results, investigators questioned Mindy's neighbors, including Mo Gibbs, a corrections officer from Barnes County Jail, hoping his professional insight might reveal something others missed. Gibbs claimed to have served in the Navy from 1990 to 1999, but was discharged due to an assault conviction and prison sentence. After release, he had no further legal issues. A former college security guard, Gibbs worked the night shift before Mindy's death. Next morning, Gibbs packed boxes into the car, preparing to move with his family. He noticed a strong smell of cleaning agent, but didn't investigate, being too busy with the move. Mo Gibbs had scratches on his hands, which he attributed to carrying boxes. When questioned about visiting Mindy Morgenstern's apartment, he claimed to have been there only once to help her carry a laundry basket. Investigators requested a DNA sample from Gibbs, which he readily provided. After collecting the sample, the police released Gibbs. They then spoke with Mindy's co-workers at the restaurant where she worked, seeking information about anyone who might have known her well. They discovered that a frequent visitor, Ralph, who lived in a nearby trailer, made Mindy uneasy. The police decided to question Ralph, who denied knowing Mindy or having any conflicts with anyone at the restaurant. Ralph didn't have a solid alibi, but he did provide a DNA sample, which was sent to the lab for analysis along with the other evidence. The detectives then turned their attention to Mindy's boyfriend, Jordan Ram. Like Mindy, Jordan came from a local farming family, and they had been together for over a year. They met at church, where they were regular attendees. Jordan had a clean record and was well liked in the community. He appeared to be deeply committed to Mindy, often taking her to spend time with his family. However, Mindy's parents mentioned that Jordan would sometimes show up at their farm uninvited, asking Mindy to leave with him. This behavior hinted at jealousy, but Eunice and Larry didn't think he was capable of harming their daughter. The police asked Jordan to come in for questioning, and he readily agreed. During the interview, Jordan cooperated fully and answered questions honestly, trying to help the investigators in any way he could. Jordan claimed to have seen Mindy the day before she died, when they went shopping and visited a video rental store. The next day, Mindy called him at 10:45 a.m., which was the day she died. This was unusual because Mindy normally called Jordan around 10 times a day, but on this day, she didn't call again or respond to his attempts to reach out. Jordan told the police about his whereabouts at the time of Mindy's death, saying he was working on his family's farm. He agreed to provide a DNA sample and take a polygraph test, but his results were inconclusive due to his anxiety. The police let him go and sent his DNA sample to the lab while they checked his alibi. However, Jordan wasn't the only person in Mindy's life who raised suspicions. Kyle Kia, Mindy's ex-boyfriend, was another potential suspect. They had broken up over a year before her death, but something strange happened after their breakup. Kyle was the love of Mindy's life, and they had been together for 2.5 years. Kyle's family had loved him, and Mindy thought she would marry him one day. After their breakup, Kyle moved to a new place about an hour away from Valley City. Mindy was worried that Kyle would find someone else, which led to their breakup. According to Kyle, he ended the relationship because he needed to move on with his life. Mindy tried to win him back, but Kyle had already started seeing someone else and stopped communicating with her. About 7 months before her death, Mindy visited Kyle's house to talk, but he told her to leave. They hadn't spoken since then. When questioned by investigators, Kyle expressed regret over how he had treated Mindy. Kyle also revealed that Mindy had been in touch with his father, Rodney Kia, which was unusual. Mindy's friends said Rodney would call her several times a day, sometimes just a few times a week. Kyle thought his father was too attached to Mindy and had even asked him to stop contacting her. Rodney's wife was upset about the situation, as he was married. The police found a voicemail message from Rodney on Mindy's phone, left after her death, in which he apologized and cried. The police found the close relationship between Rodney and Mindy suspicious and brought him in for questioning. Rodney admitted his attachment to Mindy was strange, triggered when she dated Kyle and reminded him of his young wife. They started talking about Kyle, then discussed other topics, frequently texting even after his wife found out. Mindy often initiated conversations, sometimes up to 20 times a week. Rodney, who considered Mindy like a daughter, was shocked when he heard about her tragic fate. He left an emotional voicemail for the investigators, which, although sincere, didn't dispel their suspicions. In fact, it's possible that he became obsessively fixated on her. Despite his denials, Rodney provided his DNA to the police and accounted for his whereabouts on the day of Mindy's death, claiming he worked on the farm with his 2 sons from 7:30 a.m. until evening. His family corroborated his alibi, and the investigators released him. Meanwhile, the police sent his DNA sample to the lab for comparison with the skin particles found under Mindy's fingernails. Just as the investigation seemed stalled, a DNA analysis revealed a connection to a similar attack that had occurred in Fargo, 75 miles away, 2 years prior. In that case, a woman had been attacked and forced to make contact with her assailant. The DNA sample from the Fargo case matched the one found under Mindy's fingernails, suggesting that the same perpetrator was responsible for both crimes. The police investigating Mindy's case met with the Fargo victim to gather more information about her attacker. She recounted being drugged at a bar, waking up in an unfamiliar apartment, and barely escaping her attacker. She described him as a muscular African-American man, over 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds. The police had previously entered the attacker's DNA into the federal database, but it had gone unmatched for 2 years. Now, with the new connection, they had a lead. After analyzing multiple DNA samples, the lab finally found a match: 34-year-old Mo Gibbs, a corrections officer at the Barnes County Jail, who had voluntarily provided his DNA sample. Detectives called Gibbs in for questioning, keeping him under surveillance in case he tried to flee. At the police station, they asked him to take a polygraph test, which he agreed to, but the results indicated he was lying. Gibbs denied any involvement in Mindy's death, remaining calm even after learning his DNA linked him to the case. However, the evidence was enough to arrest him and charge him with Mindy's murder. After Gibbs's arrest, 5 female prisoners came forward, accusing him of forcing them into intimate relations while he was on duty. As a result, he faced 6 additional charges. It was discovered that Gibbs had changed his name, previously being Glendale Morgan Jr. while serving in the Navy. He had been involved in a drive-by shooting and spent over 5 years in prison. Gibbs pleaded guilty to all charges except those related to Mindy's death. His defense claimed that his DNA was under Mindy's fingernails because she touched the same door handle as him, but the prosecution believed he entered her apartment, forced her into intimacy, and then killed her when she resisted. The judge deemed the evidence against Gibbs to be overwhelming and sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole. Gibbs also received additional sentences of 12 years for assault and 15 years for related charges. Although Mindy's mother publicly forgave Gibbs, she made it clear that she would never forget what he did to her daughter. Gibbs is currently serving his sentence at the North Dakota State Penitentiary. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Ashley Renee Lyons. Ashley Renee Lyons was born on July 21, 1985, in Scott County. She was active in the FFA program at Scott County High School, graduating in 2003. Ashley's brother Chris shared her passion for repairing cars, but her true interest was her boyfriend Roger McBee. After they broke up, Ashley discovered she was pregnant with his child. On January 7, 2004, Ashley learned she was having a boy and was overjoyed. She told her mom and brother about her plans to meet Roger and his parents at a restaurant in Stamping Ground. Despite her mom's offer to lend her car, Ashley opted to drive herself, saying she wouldn't be gone long. As she departed, her mom remembered her final words, "I love you, Mom. I'll be back soon." That evening, Chris received a call from Roger, who couldn't meet with Ashley and had tried calling her but didn't get an answer. When Ashley didn't return home by 8 p.m. and didn't answer her mother's calls, Carol started to worry. She called Roger's mother and learned the meeting had been canceled, sparking a frantic search for Ashley. Chris and his father searched for her, eventually checking Scott County Park, one of Ashley's favorite places. Ashley often visited Scott County Park with her boyfriend Roger, and later she would feed the ducks there on her own. The park is about 10 miles from Stamping Ground. One day, Chris and his father were driving around the park when they saw a car that looked like Ashley's. As they got closer, they realized it was indeed her car, with the engine running and the lights on. When they approached the car, Chris saw that the driver's side window was down, and Ashley was sitting inside with her head down. She was wearing a seatbelt but was unresponsive. Chris opened the door, shook her, and hoped she was just sleeping. But when he looked at his hand, he saw blood. He immediately called 911. Sadly, by the time Chris called for help, Ashley had already passed away, and the doctors couldn't save her. The devastating news soon reached Ashley's mom, who was overwhelmed with grief. The investigators arrived at the crime scene, and since Ashley's death was a result of a crime, her body remained in the car until the evidence was collected. At the scene, investigators found the car's engine running, the heater and radio on, and the driver's side window rolled down. A quick examination revealed the cause of Ashley's death. 3 9mm shell casings lay on the ground beside the car, and Ashley had sustained gunshot wounds to the head and neck. Despite a thorough search, the police were unable to find the murder weapon in the park. The unusual circumstances of the shooting suggested that Ashley was familiar with her killer. The fact that the window was down on a chilly night was suspicious, and the position of Ashley's body indicated that she had not attempted to defend herself or escape. From these clues, investigators concluded that Ashley knew her killer. The crime scene revealed that Ashley's wallet and phone were still in the car, leading investigators to quickly rule out robbery as a motive. The car's interior held a poignant clue: scattered ultrasound pictures, which Ashley had likely been looking at in the final moments of her life. At 5 months pregnant, Ashley's murder also claimed the life of her unborn son, Landon. This heinous crime was unprecedented in Scott County, and the community demanded that the police find the perpetrator. Ashley's parents told investigators she planned to meet Roger, the father of her unborn child, on the day she died. Roger was distraught, overwhelmed by emotion, and couldn't imagine who could harm his ex-girlfriend and their child. Investigators brought him in for further questioning. Roger told investigators he canceled a restaurant meeting with Ashley due to other meetings. He called her twice, but she didn't answer, so he called her home and asked Chris to have her call him back. Roger's account matched Chris's previous statement about Ashley's plans. Carol defended Roger, calling him a nice guy who got along with her family and not believe he'd harm Ashley and Landon. As investigators searched for clues, Ashley's family sought answers. Carol found her daughter's diary detailing daily life. One name stood out: Dina Williams, a classmate from a poor background, often wearing the same clothes. Initially, Ashley and Dina were friends, but their friendship deteriorated due to Dina's jealousy. Dina envied Ashley's possessions and relationships, including her romance with Roger. Ashley documented their multiple fights in her diary. Carol discovered this information from Ashley's diary and became suspicious of Dina's involvement in Ashley's death. After Ashley and Roger broke up, Dina quickly started dating Roger, which raised Carol's suspicions. Furthermore, Ashley's pregnancy with Roger's child might have motivated Dina to eliminate her as a rival for Roger's attention. Carol handed over the diary to the investigators, believing it held crucial evidence. The investigators also found Ashley's descriptions of her tumultuous relationship with Dina to be revealing. As a result, Dina was brought in for questioning at the police station, where she denied any role in Ashley's death. Dina, who worked at a bank, told investigators that she had an alibi for the evening of the crime. She was at an office party. Although she openly expressed her dislike for Ashley, especially because of her pregnancy, the lack of sentiment towards Ashley's death wasn't enough to detain her, so she was let go. The ballistic examination results revealed that the shooter was likely around 5 feet 10 inches tall. Since Dina was only 5 feet 5 inches tall, it seemed unlikely that she was the perpetrator. However, her twin brother Thomas, who matched the estimated height, had previously inquired about inducing a miscarriage, according to rumors. Moreover, people claimed that Thomas would do anything his sister asked. The investigators questioned Thomas, but he denied any involvement, and without evidence, they had no choice but to release him. Investigators' search for clues continued as Ashley's family prepared for the funeral, grappling with the unimaginable pain of losing 2 loved ones. During the autopsy, the fetus was removed from Ashley's body. Ashley and Landon were laid to rest together, a heart-wrenching gesture. The fact that the perpetrator remained at large added to the family's devastation. Ashley's parents offered a $3,000 reward, later increased to $5,000, for any information that could help catch their daughter's killer. This led to a flood of calls from people who thought they might have helpful information. One call in particular stood out. A woman who lived near the park where Ashley was shot reported that she might have seen the perpetrator. She described seeing someone running out of the park, jumping over a fence, and then getting into a red Chevrolet pickup truck that was waiting with its engine running. The truck sped away soon after. This crucial eyewitness account suggested that there might be more than one person involved in Ashley's murder, and that investigators should be looking for at least 2 suspects. The discovery of the red pickup truck led everyone who knew Ashley to suspect Roger, since he owned a similar vehicle. The police promptly took Roger's truck into custody and conducted a thorough search, but unfortunately, they found no incriminating evidence inside. The investigators decided to re-interview Dina and her brother Thomas. They started by questioning Thomas, who initially denied any involvement. However, after learning that a witness had placed Roger's pickup truck at the crime scene, Thomas became more cooperative. When asked if he knew who killed Ashley, he quickly replied that it was Roger McBeath. Thomas eventually made a deal with the investigators, trading his cooperation for a lighter sentence. He confessed to providing the gun to Roger, who then used it to shoot Ashley. Thomas also revealed that Roger had disposed of the weapon in Elorn Creek. After an extensive 6-hour dive search, the police finally found the gun, which was later confirmed through ballistics testing to be the murder weapon. The investigators initially suspected Dina of being the shooter, but they soon ruled her out due to a discrepancy in height. However, during further questioning, Dina revealed that she was the getaway driver on the night of the crime. This led to the arrests of Roger Macbeth, Dina Williams, and her twin brother Thomas. It was clear that Roger was motivated by his desire to avoid becoming a father. Ashley, on the other hand, was excited to become a mother and had the full support of her family. Roger devised a sinister plan to eliminate the problem. He lured Ashley to Scott County Park under the pretense of a meeting with his parents at a nearby restaurant. Dina drove him to the park, where he approached Ashley's car with a gun. As Ashley rolled down her window to show him ultrasound pictures, Roger shot her 3 times, killing her and their unborn child. He then fled the scene in the pickup truck, escaping with Dina's help. The perpetrators stopped and got rid of the gun by throwing it into the river. Roger Macbeth denied any involvement. Thomas Dina, on the other hand, was sentenced to 7 years in prison for his role in the crime. As part of his plea deal, Dina admitted to accepting $11,000 from Roger to harm Ashley and cause her to have a miscarriage. Although the plan was never carried out, Dina agreed to give Roger the gun used in the murder, according to court records. In 2005, Dina Williams pleaded guilty as part of a plea deal. The prosecutors recommended that she serve a total of 20 years in prison, making her eligible for parole after serving 17 years of her sentence. Prosecutors planned to call witnesses who would testify that Dina wanted Ashley dead, conspired with Roger to poison her, and even offered $1,000 to cause a miscarriage. When these plans failed, they turned to more extreme measures. Dina claimed her public defender warned her she'd likely be found guilty. She was distressed, saying she pleaded guilty to something she didn't do. Dina admitted driving Roger to the park, but said she drove around the subdivision while they met and later returned to pick him up. During her drive, a woman heard 3 gunshots, but at the time, she didn't know what they were. Dina, who was involved in the events, stated that Roger had planned something without her knowledge. Later, he called Ashley on his phone, telling her he loved her and was sorry he missed meeting her at the park. The jury listened to a recording of this message during Roger's trial. According to Dina, when she left the park, Roger never mentioned that Ashley was dead. Dina also claimed that she didn't report the incident to the police because she was afraid of Roger, who she said was abusive towards her. Dina Williams said she was terrified of Roger, who threatened to kill her. She expressed regret and sympathy for the Ashley family. However, Roger's parents disputed her testimony, calling her a compulsive liar who acted impulsively. They accused Dina of being jealous of Ashley and taking a plea deal to avoid responsibility. Dina was sentenced to 20 years in prison, released on parole in 2021, and claimed she was young and influenced by Roger at the time of the crime, denying knowledge of his relationship with the victim. During her time in prison, Dina participated in various rehabilitation programs, including anger management, legal aid training, horticulture, and Braille transcription courses. Roger's initial murder conviction was overturned in 2009 by the Kentucky Supreme Court due to illegally obtained evidence. The court ruled that prosecutors had used evidence from an unauthorized jail informant who had engaged in casual conversations with Roger, hoping to elicit incriminating statements. The informant had exceeded his authorized role, leading to the conviction being overturned. Roger later pleaded guilty to being an accomplice to murder and tampering with evidence, and was sentenced to 42 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 16 years. He also received a concurrent 5-year sentence for evidence tampering. At his 2023 parole hearing, Roger expressed remorse for his actions, stating that he didn't deserve parole and was truly sorry for what he had done. He wanted to apologize to the family of Ashley Lyons, the mother of his child, whom he had loved deeply. Although he acknowledged his daily regret, his parole eligibility was declined and the hearing was discontinued. Roger remains in prison. In memory of Ashley, an angel garden with ceramic angel statues has been created at Scott County Park, where she tragically died. After Ashley's death, Carol and her husband Buford Lyons worked to pass a law that recognizes violence against a pregnant woman as two separate crimes, one against the woman herself and another against her unborn child. This law was passed at both the state and federal levels. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Alicia Canales McGuire. Alicia was born on October 29, 1992, in Mount Vernon, Washington, to Manuel and Michelle Canales. Her passion was helping others, which led her to work as a caregiver for most of her adult life. Growing up on a farm, Alicia learned the value of hard work from a young age, starting to work at just 5 years old. She often returned to the family farm to lend a hand. Spending time with her family was crucial to Alicia, and she made it a point to regularly visit and call them, always remembering to express her love when saying goodbye. Alicia lived in Birdsview with her husband Bradle. Alicia lived in the house her sister Amanda's home, where Amanda lived with her 3 children. When Amanda had to travel to New York for work, she asked Alicia to watch her kids during her absence. Alicia was happy to help care for her nephew and nieces. One night, a nanny staying in the house with her called 911 after waking up to the sound of gunshots. When the nanny went downstairs, she found Alicia lying motionless at the front door. The police officers who arrived at the scene first secured the house to ensure the perpetrator was not still inside. They carefully checked every room, confirming that only the nanny and the children were present. Once the children were safely removed from the house, the police began searching for evidence. A car was parked in front of the house, with shell casings nearby, indicating that the shooter had stood next to the car right before the front door. Several bullets had hit the door frame, and Alicia's body was lying face down just outside the door. The police found no signs of a robbery, as the house was not in disarray, and it appeared that the perpetrator had not entered the house at all. The detectives were left wondering who would want to kill Alicia and why. When they discovered that the crime scene was her sister's house, they considered the possibility of mistaken identity. Maybe Amanda, Alicia's sister, was the intended target, but she was safely in New York at the time. The investigators turned to the nanny, who was also in the house during the shooting, for answers. After calming down, she was able to provide some information. She told them that she was upstairs when she heard the gunshots, and when she looked down, she saw Alicia lying face down on the floor, motionless. Unfortunately, she didn't see the shooter. She mentioned that Amanda, Alicia's sister, had issues with her ex-husband, Kevin Lewis. Upon reviewing reports from the local sheriff's office, the detectives discovered that this was not the first call to the address, with all previous incidents related to domestic disputes between Amanda and Kevin Lewis. The detectives focus on this particular testimony. They located Kevin Lewis's home address in another part of Everett and paid him a visit before dawn. His house was dark, and when they knocked on the door, Kevin answered. During their conversation, the officers asked if he knew where his ex-wife was, and he replied that she should be at home. Appearing disheveled, as if he had just woken up, the detectives asked Kevin to account for his whereabouts the previous night. He claimed to have stayed at home and stated that his sister and mother could vouch for his alibi. Notably, he didn't ask why the detectives were visiting him. When detectives told Kevin that a shooting had occurred at the house where his children lived, he showed no emotional response, which was unusual. As a parent, he should have asked about his children's well-being, but he remained silent. However, when they informed him that Amanda was out of town on business, he expressed surprise, saying "Really?" and the conversation ended there. The detectives decided to investigate further by reviewing footage from surveillance cameras at neighboring houses. They wanted to verify Kevin's alibi that he had stayed home all night. They saw a car stopped near Kevin's driveway about 40 minutes before the attack on Alicia. A person resembling Kevin then exited the house, got into the car, and drove away a few moments later. Although the footage was not clear enough to confirm it was definitely Kevin, the detectives continued to review additional camera footage. They took a closer look at the car, but that didn't help identify it. All they could determine was that it was a light-colored vehicle. They fast-forwarded the recording and saw the car return about 20 minutes later. This time, they noticed a crucial detail. The front right rim was different from the others. While the three other rims were light in color, the front right one was dark. The car stopped near Kevin Lewis's house, and the same person who had gotten out of the car earlier got out again and went back inside. Whoever this person was, they entered the house about 20 minutes before the 911 calls about a shooting started coming in. After that, the car left and didn't come back. Since it was a 15-minute drive from Kevin's house to Amanda's house, it's possible that the car had enough time to get to Amanda's place. However, it was too early to say whether this car was involved in the shooting at all. Amanda found out about her sister's death a few hours later, when their father called her in New York to break the news. When investigators asked Amanda, a key witness, if she thought her ex-husband Kevin was responsible for Alicia's murder, she was adamant that he was the one. Although Amanda's 8-year marriage to Kevin Lewis ended, she struggled to acknowledge the toxic nature of their relationship. Despite their divorce in June 2017, Amanda lived in fear of Kevin, who had physically abused her in the past, leaving her with bruises. After their separation, Kevin continued to threaten her. In August 2017, Amanda was granted full custody of their 3 young children, and Kevin was ordered to provide $800 in monthly support instead of child support. This marked a fresh start for Amanda, who focused on rebuilding her life in Everett, Washington, and was grateful for the support of her family as a single mother. Kevin, a former military man, threatened to kill Amanda, and she took him seriously due to his training. Believing she was the target, Amanda obtained a restraining order against Kevin, but he violated it multiple times. He would often lurk around her house, peeking through the windows, which terrified not only Amanda, but also her 3 children. Despite the violations, Kevin was never charged by the police. Weeks before her sister's tragic death, Amanda was brutally beaten in her own driveway. She was getting out of her car late one night when someone launched a surprise attack. Although the assault happened quickly and she didn't see the attacker's face, Amanda was convinced that Kevin was behind it. Investigators believe 30-year-old Kevin Lewis is the prime suspect in the murder of Alicia. They think he intended to kill his ex-wife, but he was unaware that she was in New York at the time. Unbeknownst to him, Amanda had asked Alicia to babysit her children while she was away. However, there's a problem with this theory. If Kevin was the person in the footage, it would mean he was at his home during the shooting. Moreover, his sister and mother have provided him with a solid alibi. As a result, the police have continued their investigation, exploring alternative explanations for the crime. They returned to Amanda's house to re-examine the crime scene and track the path of the bullets. The investigation revealed that Alicia was shot when the door was only partially open. The shooter fired at least 7 shots from outside the house, which entered the interior. The evidence suggests that the shooter stood next to the garage and fired, then moved towards the door and fired again from inside. The medical examiner determined that Alicia died from multiple gunshot wounds to the head and torso, with 5 shots hitting her. 2 of the wounds showed signs of gunpowder residue, indicating close-range shots. While the examiner couldn't determine the exact order of the 5 shots, they believe the last 2 head wounds were likely the final 2 inflicted. Furthermore, experts concluded that the 7 shell casings found at the scene came from the same gun. Alicia's head wounds were caused by close-range bullet shots. The investigators explored the possibility of a personal motive behind her murder, but found no evidence to support this theory. The shell casings discovered at the crime scene were a rare Russian-made brand called Tul Ammo, which gave the police hope of tracing the seller and buyer. The police learned that Walmart had sold the 9mm Tul Ammo cartridges and had CCTV footage of the purchase. Upon reviewing the footage recorded 2 days before Alicia's death, they initially suspected Kevin Lewis as the buyer. However, the footage revealed a different person who paid using a credit card. The police identified this individual, but found no connection to Kevin Lewis, Alicia, or the nanny. The investigation thus required new leads and evidence. Amanda was questioned by investigators about her relationship with Kevin. She revealed that their relationship started well, but Kevin eventually became aggressive and violent, leading to their divorce, a restraining order, and Amanda gaining full custody of their children. Despite this, Amanda believed that she was the intended target of the shooting that killed Alicia, not Alicia herself. She suspected that Lewis had orchestrated the attack, but investigators knew that Kevin was at home at the time of the shooting. Upon re-examining the footage from the night of Alicia's death, investigators noticed something they had previously overlooked. The low-quality recording showed Kevin leaving his house and getting into the back seat of a car behind the driver. This raised questions, as most people would typically sit in the front passenger seat. The likely explanation was that someone else was already sitting in the front passenger seat, meaning there were probably 2 people in the car by the time it arrived at Kevin's house. This new evidence didn't directly link Kevin to Alicia's death, but it did contribute to the growing case against him for attacking his ex-wife Amanda. In November 2018, Kevin was arrested and later sentenced to 3 years in prison. Over a year had passed since Alicia's tragic death, yet her case remained a mystery. However, a breakthrough finally came in 2019 when the police station received a crucial call from a woman with vital information. The caller claimed to have met a girl named Angelica at a party in nearby Spokane, who boasted about being hired to commit a murder on York Road, the same road where Alicia was fatally shot. Although the police were initially skeptical, given the significant distance of 5 hours between Spokane and Everett. According to the caller, Angelica had proudly shared details about how she and her boyfriend were involved in the crime. Alexis Hale, alias Angelica, claimed a woman was fatally shot in the head, saying the killer was hired by the children's father and mistakenly targeted the wrong person. Police were interested in her detailed knowledge of the case. They discovered her true identity, found social media photos of her with a 9mm pistol, and videos featuring her boyfriend, Jadon Phelps. A video posted by Alexis on the night of the murder helped investigators pinpoint her location, about 10 minutes from Kevin Lewis's house. Jadon boasted about a large sum of money on social media, leading police to discover his connection to Kevin through his aunt. With this evidence, they made an arrest. The first person to be taken into custody was Alexis Hale, who protested loudly, claiming she was only 17 and couldn't be arrested. However, she knew why she was being arrested and demanded a lawyer. Police arrested Jadon Phelps, analyzing his and Hale's phone records, showing they drove from Spokane to Everett to commit the shooting. Security footage from Lewis's neighbors revealed someone in a white top leaving and returning around the time of the crime. Lewis was wearing a white top when questioned. Phelps, in custody, revealed Kevin Lewis hired him and Hale and led police through the crime scene, pointing out the door and corner. He stood where he was positioned during the crime, reenacting the events, and admitted to shooting at the door when it opened slightly, then firing 2 more shots before fleeing. Kevin Lewis was already in jail for a crime when he was arrested and charged with aggravated murder with a firearm, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder in connection with the September 2017 death of Alicia. In July 2020, 20-year-old Phelps pleaded guilty to premeditated first-degree murder and was sentenced to 31 years in prison. His co-defendant, 18-year-old Hale, also pleaded guilty to the same charge and received a 15-year sentence. During the trial, Phelps testified that he committed the crime for financial gain and to increase his reputation on the streets. He used the money Lewis paid him to get tattoos, purchase a pair of Timberland boots, and buy a Ferragamo belt buckle. Phelps claimed that his former girlfriend had obtained the gun used in the crime from a family member, and he had given her $200. Lewis pleaded not guilty and faced trial. Prosecutors alleged he paid $2,400 to his cousin and girlfriend to kill his ex-wife, but they mistakenly targeted Alicia. Lewis directed them to the address, claiming he didn't know the target. Phelps and Hale exited their vehicle, with Phelps stopping near the garage and Hale knocking on the door. As Alicia opened it, Phelps fired multiple shots, eventually walking up to the porch, and they fled. They returned, fearing they left a glove, but saw police and drove away. Finally, Judge Thompson also ordered Lewis to no longer have any contact with his ex-wife, his children, and Phelps and Hale for the rest of his life. Records indicate that he remains incarcerated at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla County. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Vera Pekteleva. Vera Pekteleva was born on September 24, 1997, in Kelos, Kovo Oblast. She grew up to be a cheerful, creative, and talented individual who excelled in singing competitions during her school years. Despite her parents, Oksana and Yvonne, divorcing while she was still in school, Vera maintained a good relationship with both of them and their new partner. People who knew her described Vera as kind, positive, and avoiding conflict. After graduating from high school, Vera surprised her family by enrolling in the State Technical University in Kovo instead of pursuing a career in the arts. Her mother, Oksana, lived in Kisilov, about 110 miles from Kovo, and Vera would visit her during her free time. During one of these visits in 2016, Vera met Vladislav Kanyus, a young man her age. Vladislav was her opposite in many ways. He lacked direction, was introverted, and had a quick temper. He had dropped out of school after 9th grade and came from a troubled home. His mother had abandoned the family, leaving him to live with his father, who had legal problems and eventually took his own life in front of Vladislav. This traumatic experience had a lasting impact on Vladislav's life. Vera and Vladislav's relationship was unlikely, as they had little in common. Despite this, Vera fell in love with him. However, her parents were strongly opposed to the relationship due to Vladislav's troubled past. They wanted a better life for Vera and disapproved of her choice. Vera's mother, Oksana, stated that they waited for Vera to end the relationship, but instead, she stopped talking about Vladislav with them. Vladislav was never invited to family gatherings and did not appear in Vera's social media photos, making it seem like she was hiding him. In 2019, Vera and Vladislav moved in together in Kovo, with her parents helping to pay for the apartment. Although Vladislav was unemployed and had no intention of changing that, he enjoyed living with Vera, who was beautiful, smart, and financially stable. As a result, she supported him. The relationship was tense, and Vladislav's alcohol abuse was a major concern. Vera's parents suspected that Vladislav was physically abusing her as well. Vera ended her toxic relationship with Vladislav in November 2019 with the help of her parents, who assisted her in paying for a new apartment. Logically, Vladislav should have moved out, but he refused to do so, as he enjoyed living at someone else's expense. According to Vladislav's testimony, he and Vera had a fight on December 15, 2019, because he wanted to go to a nightclub, but she declined. Vladislav claimed that during their relationship, Vera began to distance herself from him, often traveling to Kelos, and eventually admitting to communicating with someone else. Keep in mind that this is Vladislav's testimony, and it's up to you to decide how credible his words are. According to Vladislav, a month before their breakup, Vera told him she was leaving him. Later, he found out from a mutual friend that she was already seeing someone else, a guy named Alexander from Selos. He didn't know Alexander personally. After learning this, he wanted to talk to Vera about it. They were still living together in the same apartment at the time. On December 15, 2019, they had a fight and she left, taking some of her things with her. Even though they weren't together anymore, they stayed in touch by phone. On January 12, 2020, he called Vera and offered to help her move her remaining belongings to a new place. She agreed, and they planned to meet up the next day to do the move. When January 13th came around, Vera showed up, and they packed up both her stuff and his, since he was planning to move out of the apartment too. He didn't want to stay there without her. On January 13th, 2020, Vladislav and Vera consumed beer, lure, and vodka while packing. They both became intoxicated. Despite their inebriated state, they did not argue during the drinking session, which continued until 5 a.m. on January 14th, 2020. However, a conflict emerged when Vladislav brought up their relationship and suggested they get back together. He also confronted her about seeing another guy, which Vera denied. This led to an altercation, during which Vera became aggressive, swearing, insulting, and physically attacking Vladislav. She kicked him in the groin area at least 5 times and slapped him in the face at least 8 times. Although he didn't feel pain from the slaps, the kicks caused him physical discomfort. Vladislav claimed that Vera's aggression was triggered by his discovery of her infidelity, which made him angry. Vera, on the other hand, accused him of prying into her personal life and continued to insult him. This is the version of events as told by Vladislav to the police. However, there are reasons to believe that Vladislav's testimony may not be entirely truthful. Vera was determined to move out of the apartment she shared with Vladislav and wanted no part in drinking with him. She asked her friend to assist her with the move and sent a voice message at 5:08 p.m. saying she was already packing her belongings and would be at her new apartment by 6 p.m. She requested her friend's help in transporting her belongings from the taxi to the new apartment. However, just 3 minutes later, Vera sent another voice message inviting her friend to come to her current apartment to help with the move. But before she could finish, Vladislav intervened, stating that no one was allowed in the apartment, effectively blocking her friend from coming. The situation was escalating, and at 5:15 p.m., Vera sent a quiet, low-voiced message to her friend, seemingly a distress call, as she attempted to keep it from Vladislav's ears. 10 minutes later, at 5:25 p.m., Vera sent another voice message, but this time Vladislav's voice could be heard, instructing Vera's friend not to bother them and to wait for Vera to text her. By 7:19 p.m., Vladislav had taken control, sending a voice message himself. From that point on, Vera was silenced, and her friend no longer heard from her. It seemed that Vera was trapped alone with Vladislav. The night took a dark turn when, at around 3 a.m., the neighbors on the same floor were awoken by blood-curdling screams coming from apartment 738. A bystander described the unfolding tragedy as a massacre. The screams from the apartment were so loud that 15 people, including Vladislav's brother, gathered in the hallway. Vladislav's brother recalled his brother's previous threats to harm Vera and realized they needed to intervene. Since the door was made of iron, the neighbors searched for tools to pry it open. Meanwhile, Vera's desperate cries for help continued to echo from the apartment. The bystanders called the emergency service multiple times, but their calls were ultimately part of a separate investigation. Despite the repeated calls, the police failed to arrive for 30 minutes until 6:30 a.m. During this agonizing period, the neighbors made 7 emergency calls, but no help came. The last words they heard from Vladislav were, "Vera, forgive me, I love you very much." Finally, the neighbors found a crowbar in a nearby parking lot and broke down the door. Tragically, they found Vera dead and Vladislav, who was heavily intoxicated, in the bathroom. Meanwhile, The 112 operators were indifferent to the emergency calls, chatting, laughing, and drinking tea, complaining about being disturbed as Vera lay dying at the hands of her former boyfriend. The police did not arrive at the scene until after Vera's death had been reported. They later justified their delayed response by claiming that one of their patrol cars had no gas and that all available officers were busy handling other emergency calls. As a result, the operators who handled the 112 emergency calls and the police officers on duty that night were also put on trial. A police station video was made public, showing officers displaying a shocking lack of urgency. Vladislav Kanyus initially claimed that he and Vera didn't have any conflicts until 5 a.m., but forensic evidence disputed this, showing that he had lied. In reality, Vera's first injury occurred around midnight, which meant that Vladislav had brutally beaten and injured her for 6 hours before she eventually died. The autopsy results were shocking, revealing a total of 100 injuries on Vera's body, including stab wounds, a broken nose and ribs, and evidence of strangulation around her neck. The community was outrageously upset, and more than 1,000 people attended her funeral, exceeding the church's capacity. Vera's mother, Oksana, was left devastated by the unrecognizable state of her daughter's body, which required an extensive 4-hour restoration process at the funeral home. At the same time, Vladislav was providing a false account to investigators, trying to downplay his role in the vicious crime. The indictment alleges that the police officers were negligent in their response to the situation. They had access to gasoline, but even if they didn't, they should have taken necessary steps to resolve the issue. However, they didn't treat the situation as urgent and failed to take prompt action. Furthermore, the 2 police officers refused to cooperate with the investigation and denied any wrongdoing. Their defense was that when witnesses reported the screams and cries for help, the investigation team was already occupied at a different location where a corpse had been discovered earlier. In 2022, Vladislav Kanyus was sentenced to 17 years in prison after admitting partial guilt. He was also ordered to pay $45,000 in compensation. Vera's parents were shocked by the leniency of the sentence and planned to appeal. However, Vladislav didn't serve his full sentence. In April 2023, it was discovered that he had received a presidential pardon after serving just 6 months in prison. Furthermore, photos of him in military uniform surfaced online in November 2023. Vladislav Kanyus, the person responsible for Vera's death, was not only pardoned, but also relieved of the obligation to pay compensation to her parents. The news sparked widespread outrage in Russia. The press secretary of the Russian president explained the pardoning procedure, stating that it involves a series of steps. First, the convict must confess to their crime. Then, the request for pardon is reviewed at multiple levels, including the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Regional, Federal District, and Central Commission, before reaching the president. Alternatively, convicts can also redeem themselves by fighting on the battlefield, where they risk their lives under fire. This alternative path to redemption is difficult to accept, especially for Vera's parents, who were devastated to learn that Kanyus was free to start anew while their daughter would never have that chance. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Brandon Duran. Brandon Duran was born in 1980 in San Diego, California, to a father who was a passionate motorcyclist and a former member of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, considered a criminal organization by the FBI. When Brandon was around 10 years old, his parents divorced, but they maintained a good relationship and shared responsibilities in raising their son. Brandon inherited his father's love for motorcycles and at 25, built his own bike from scratch, which became a treasured possession. He socialized with other bikers, but never joined a motorcycle club. However, his life took a dramatic turn when his father unexpectedly passed away in April 2005, plunging Brandon into depression. To overcome his grief, Brandon decided to make a change in his life and embarked on a road trip to Las Vegas on his motorcycle. During his year-long stay in Vegas, he met Amber Andrews, 24, and they fell deeply in love. Their whirlwind romance led to marriage just 2 months later, and Amber became pregnant soon after. In December 2006, Amber gave birth to their son, Brando. The arrival of his son marked a significant transformation in Brandon's life. He became a devoted father and husband, prioritizing his family over his personal interests and securing a high-paying job. Amber failed to prioritize her new role as a mother, instead continuing to frequent biker gatherings and parties. This led to a rapid deterioration in the young family's relationships, with fights becoming increasingly common. The inevitable outcome was divorce, filed just 4 years after their wedding. Brandon was granted full custody of their child due to his ability to provide for himself and his son, unlike Amber. After the divorce was finalized in 2010, Amber returned to her hometown in Oklahoma, while Brandon went back to San Diego with their son. There, he was reunited with his family, who helped him raise his child. As time passed, Brandon's emotional wounds from the failed marriage began to heal, and he became optimistic about the future. However, in the summer of 2012, Amber unexpectedly showed up at his doorstep, asking for a second chance at their relationship. Brandon's long-suppressed feelings resurfaced, and he chose to believe in Amber's sincerity, agreeing to give their relationship another try. With their son Brando set to start kindergarten in September, Amber requested that the three of them visit her parents in Oklahoma, who were eager to see their grandson. Brandon consented, and they began preparing for the trip, planning to stay in Oklahoma for about a week. A few days before Brandon, Amber and their son were due to return to San Diego, Van Emblem reached out to the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. He reported that his friend and employer, 30-year-old Justin Hammer from Garvin County, had asked for his help in disposing of a body, claiming it was that of Brandon Duran. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation alerted the local sheriff, who immediately visited Hammer's ranch with his assistant. They also contacted Brandon's relatives in San Diego, who informed them that they had been unable to reach Brandon for several days. Once this information was confirmed, the authorities decided not to share the details of the case with Brandon's family. Justin Hammer unexpectedly confessed to killing Brandon Duran when questioned by detectives. However, he claimed it was self-defense, saying that Brandon, a member of a dangerous motorcycle gang, had come to his house on August 7th, kicked in the door, and threatened him. According to Hammer, Brandon was angry about his relationship with Amber and threatened to harm him and his family if he didn't stay away from her. Hammer said he grabbed a nearby shotgun and fired it, killing Brandon. Fearing retaliation from the motorcycle club, Hammer did not call the police and instead hid the evidence. He dismembered Brandon's body in the bathroom using a saw, then put the remains in 5-gallon buckets filled with cement. Hammer needed help loading the heavy buckets into his pickup truck, so he asked his friend Van for assistance. After they loaded the buckets, Van left and reported Hammer to the police. Hammer's ranch had a small pond where he disposed of the buckets after handling the body. He then cleaned the house and later burned the cleaning supplies, gloves, and rags. According to Hammer, he gave Brandon's motorcycle to a relative who unknowingly received the bike and dismantled it for spare parts. The police investigation led to the discovery of 5 buckets at the bottom of the pond. When the officers informed Amber about Brandon's death, she was shocked. She revealed that although she and Brandon were divorced, they had planned to reunite. Amber also confessed to having fought with Brandon the day before his death, following his discovery of her affair with Justin Hammer. This new information prompted the investigators to focus on Amber. She claimed that Brandon left on his motorcycle after their argument, but his family said it was broken. The question arose, if the motorcycle wasn't severely damaged, why would Brandon take it to Oklahoma for repairs instead of fixing it locally? Amber's story about her whereabouts on the day of Brandon's death raised suspicions. She claimed to have a doctor's appointment, but the police couldn't find any records of her visiting a medical facility that day. This meant she had no alibi for the time of Brandon's death. Detectives later found out that Amber had asked a friend to watch her son that day. When the friend arrived at 3 p.m., Amber and Brandon left the house together in Brandon's pickup truck, which had a motorcycle in the back. Amber left her phone behind and didn't return for 8 hours. When she finally came back, Brandon and the motorcycle were no longer with the truck. On Amber's phone, investigators discovered a message from Justin Hammer sent just before she and Brandon left the house, which read, "The ink is ready." The police thought this was a code, indicating that everything was in place to deal with Brandon. After talking to Amber's close friends, detectives learned that she had no interest in getting back together with her ex-husband and often spoke negatively about him. She was bitter about Brandon having full custody of their son and resented him. New evidence emerged that contradicted Amber's account. Forensic analysis confirmed that Amber had written the suspicious note found in Hammer's safe, which listed items necessary for disposing of a body. Furthermore, footage from the local hardware store's CCTV cameras revealed that the crime was premeditated. The footage showed Hammer purchasing buckets and other items from Amber's list the day before Brandon's murder. Despite this, Hammer claimed during his trial that he had acted alone in self-defense, attempting to shield Amber from suspicion. He asserted that the items on the list were actually for home repairs, not for getting rid of the body. Justin Hammer claimed to have used 2 weapons during the crime, holding a shotgun in one hand and a pistol in the other. However, investigators found this statement suspicious and unlikely. The trial, expected to last several weeks, surprisingly ended with the jury deliberating for only an hour and a half. They returned with a recommended sentence of life in prison without parole. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Austin expressed satisfaction with the verdict, stating it was a fitting punishment and brought justice to Brandon Duran's family. She believed the sentence was appropriate. Cindy Ware, Brandon's mother, was overjoyed with the jury's decision and acknowledged that it must have been a difficult one to make. She had been hoping for this outcome for 2 years. In October 2014, Justin Hammer was formally sentenced to life in prison without parole. 2 months later, his wife Amber was arrested and charged with first-degree murder of her ex-husband, desecrating his remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Despite pleading not guilty, Amber was denied bail. Amber sat in the courtroom, handcuffed and dressed in a light purple inmate suit, expressing frustration that it had taken 32 months to be reunited with her son. She had only just been allowed to return home to him a month prior, and she was desperate to stay with him until the trial. However, District Judge Jeff Virgin of Norman, Oklahoma, denied her request for bail, agreeing with the prosecution's argument that the seriousness of the allegations against her made her a flight risk. The trial, which began in the spring of 2017, was a long time coming. Over 2 years had passed since Amber was charged. She maintained her innocence, with her lawyers claiming she was not present at the crime scene. Conversely, prosecutors Christy Miller and Jennifer Austin argued that Andrews had the strongest motive to kill Brandon Duran. Miller testified that Amber Andrews was the only person with a motive to want him gone, as she needed him to disappear in order to regain custody of their son. According to Miller, Amber had a strong reason to want him out of the way, and Hammer had a place where the crime could be committed. They thought they had come up with the perfect plan. The prosecutor explained that Amber's motive was to get rid of Duran so she could regain custody of their young son. He pointed out that Amber had been absent from home for 8 hours on the day of Brandon's death, and there was no evidence to support her alibi. The prosecutor suggested that Amber had helped Hammer get rid of the body and clean up the house, neglecting her parental responsibilities in the process. However, the defense attorney Jay Mendros argued that the prosecutor's office had not provided any evidence linking Amber to the crime. He told the jurors that when there is no evidence, the prosecution resorts to attacking Amber's character. According to Mendros, the state's case was based on a theory, but there was no concrete evidence to support it. Mendros claimed that Amber was not capable of planning a murder and that Justin, who was afraid of losing her, had committed the crime. Mendros described the situation as a recipe for disaster, with Duran visiting Oklahoma to rekindle his romance with Amber, while Hammer, who had been Amber's boyfriend for a year, feared losing her to Duran. The defense attorney portrayed the case as a tragic love triangle, where Justin Hammer had a strong motive to kill Brandon Duran, as he was torn between his feelings for Amber and the threat Duran posed. The attorney argued that Amber had been emotionally involved with both men and had oscillated between them, making it difficult to pinpoint her true intentions. The prosecution's case relied on twisted and distorted statements that created a sinister impression in an attempt to imprison someone based on speculation and rumors. The attorney emphasized that, in the American justice system, people are not convicted on assumptions. There must be concrete evidence, and in this case, there was none to suggest that Amber was a co-conspirator or a murderer. Justin Hammer had confessed to the murder, taking full responsibility for the crime. However, during the trial, it was Amber Andrews who was found guilty of the crime. The jurors delivered a guilty verdict after hearing closing arguments, recommending a life sentence for the 35-year-old. Amber appeared in court on June 12, 2017, seemingly in a good mood, awaiting sentencing. Brandon's mother, Cindy Ware, took the stand, overcome with emotion, to share how her son's murder had impacted her and her grandson, Brando. Cindy placed a photo of Duran next to the stand and expressed how Amber had shattered all her dreams. She stated that Brandon's only wish was to be with his family, and Amber had brutally taken that away from him. Cindy sorrowfully reflected on the memories they would never create, such as Brandon teaching Brando how to snowboard and the bright smile that would never again light up a room. Before the judge's final decision, defense attorney Jay Mendros addressed the court once more. He maintained that there was still no concrete evidence linking Amber to the murder and requested that the judge dismiss the jury's guilty verdict and restart the case. Mendros argued that the prosecution's case lacked credible evidence and relied heavily on emotional manipulation to sway the jurors. In essence, the state built a case against Amber based on speculation and gut feelings, rather than concrete proof. The prosecution's strategy was to shock and outrage the jurors, rather than present tangible evidence. As a result, Amber was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the first-degree murder of Brandon Duran, plus additional time for desecrating human remains and conspiring to commit a felony. Meanwhile, Justin Hammer is currently serving his sentence at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma, while Amber Andrews is incarcerated at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center in McLeod, Oklahoma. Brandon Duran has been in the care of the Oklahoma Department of Human Services since August 7, 2012, living with a foster family. In January 2013, Brando was finally allowed to return to San Diego to live with his grandmother, Cindy, after a long and difficult court battle. However, this was not the end of the fight. It took Cindy 5 more years to gain full legal custody of Brando. Once the custody battle was over, Cindy and her relatives sat down with Brando to explain the truth about the verdict and what had happened to his mother.